I'm going to do it for me. So you guys, a lot of history in the Levies. So it's going to go from the last seat, Russ. The last seat.
I was told.
All right, everybody. Let's call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of the Island Stress Executive and the Bowen Island Municipal Council. We'll do the approval of the agenda and any late items, Hope.
There are several on-table items that were circulated to council and the executive and staff earlier today. We do not provide hard copies of them.
All right.
For clarity, this is just in relation to correspondence received. The substance of the agenda hasn't changed.
Okay, thank you.
That's that long list, right?
This long list, yes.
Yeah.
Somebody want to approve the agenda, please? Thank you. Second, use Michael. All in favor? Thank you. Unanimous. Okay, we're going to move on to public comments. What have we got, Hope?
We have 5.
Okay.
Andre Shalot.
Name and address, please, Andre.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Andre Cholat, 1425 West Side Road, on the west side of Bowen Island. And you have to bear with me. I'm very short-sighted now. Your Worship, ladies and gentlemen of the Island Trust representative and municipal councillors. Once again, as municipal council, you are reflecting on the decision to be part or not of the Island Trust. A decision of major importance given the potential long-term consequences of your choice for Bowen Island and its future community well-being. As residents, we were provided by an article of Councillor Sue and Fast in the Undercurrent with the overall role of the Island Trust in assembling all necessary scientific data that could help protect the environment and the ecology of the 400 islands of the Salish Sea and Bowen Island in our Sound. In the past weeks, there were some negative comments circulating about Bowen Island being a member of the Island Trust and about its annual cost added to our property tax. I was in Vancouver when the Island Trust was established at the same time as the Agricultural Land Reserve. It made lots of noises then from an opposition that was profiting from the absence of regulation on both agricultural land in BC and in the management of the Gulf Islands and marine land close to Vancouver after the WSC Bennett government period. Since 1974, the Island Trust has built an impressive record of scientific, ecological and social data for the protection of marine life, natural environment and ecological protection of unique flora and fauna of most islands, as well as protecting their development and way of life. But nothing can be taken for granted given the perennial public and private pressure for development of land and resources. This is more evident, excuse me, I'm sorry. This is more evident now than in the past decades, and particularly for Bowen Island, as an autonomous and unique municipality that will need all the support it can get of a well-established organization with a wealth of information. Regarding its annual cost, it is very similar in principle to what we have to pay as property owners to have our house protected by insurance for fire or for anything else, with premiums increasing from year to year for a potential help that we hope we will never need to ask. As members of the community, my wife and I pay the yearly transit tax for a system that we have never used, a food garbage tax for a service that we have managed to reduce to 4 or 5 bags a year. But that is all part of being all together, and it's only all together that we can hope to have a healthy community as we have on Bowen Island. This includes our participation to the good functioning of the Island Trust. Sincerely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Frank DeFerrier?
My name is Anne de Ferrière and I live at 1425 West Side Road. And this is the letter that I've submitted on February the 10th. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are preparing the budget of the Islands Trust for the 2019-2020, that includes the participation of Bowen Island property tax levy of 4.2%, we would like to renew our support of the Islands Trust, its importance and its achievement for the protection of the Gulf Islands and Bowen Island. When in 1974, the government of British Columbia realized how precarious the ecological environment of the Gulf Islands was under the pressure of development and resource extraction, it created the Islands Trust and the ALR to protect the agricultural land of the province, particularly in the Fraser Valley. Thanks to such a long-term vision, the beauty and special way of life of the Gulf Islands have been preserved, as well as major part of the agricultural land of the Fraser Delta. But this has never been to the liking of some British Columbians who would have profited of the development of those areas. It is still the case today, with some people calling to withdraw from the Islands Trust because of its annual cost for a non-obvious visible return. We should not be surprised by such demands when we are witnessing the same manipulating play around the world as in the UK in particular. Nothing is being offered as an alternative to achieve the same protection of our marine environment, our crown lands, resources, and the potential abusive land development. We express our gratitude to all elected councillors whose dedication and energy will help protect our environment and way of living in this unique part of the world that requires some unique executive creativity.
Thank you.
Rodney Day?
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to the Islands Trust more on a personal nature. I came here 35 years ago to develop a marina, which they rejected. But you gotta remember, we're on an island, and an island needs marinas. As part of that, we had to put in a sewer system for the community, and we did, but again, the Islands Trust was terribly against any sewage system. I can still remember the head of the Islands Trust at the time. I can't remember what island she was from. She says everyone should be able to go to the rose garden and find the outhouse at the bottom. We don't need sewer systems. It took from that time, which was roughly 15 years later, that we finally were able to hook up the boats to the pump out system because the Islands Trust was fighting it all this time. I look to the Islands Trust not to preserve and to protect. I look at them to preserve and protect with good planning. I haven't seen any good planning, at least on this island, from the Islands Trust. Let me give you a few examples. First of all, you simply put everything in 10-acre lots and said, well, that'll stop all the growth. There was no commercial. We've got commercials spread out all over the island now. There was no densities, only 10-acre lots, which encouraged large homes without secondary homes at the time. Somewhat changed now. Getting back to my development, you, meaning Islands Trust, rejected it and then turned it over to the GVRD to take over and to do the planning. Eventually they did, but you referred to it as to protect and save. I refer to you as SOS, stop everything or slow it down. That isn't good planning. And I just can't see why we would want to continue on with the Islands Trust at this time. I think the municipality is doing a much better job and will continue to do so. I see absolutely no value in the Islands Trust at this time in this community. I can read you, I went through my notes and I started pulling out things to address to you, and I found one here in 1993, and it was really just the facts, please. And this was another project, not mine. This was Cowan's Point. Here are some facts for the Bowen Island residents to consider. Our current trustees seem to work only to oppose and kill development. They killed the well-planned comprehensive plan on Cowan's Point, a plan that had 60% of the residents supporting it. When Dinsdale and off-island trustees Carol Martin killed the Cowan's Point project, Dave Morgan and other trustees resigned at the time. The project, let me just run through some stuff. I hate to take too much of your time, but you remember we lost these things. We lost control over all aspects of the development. What did we get instead? Well, we got the developer only has to comply with the Minister of Highway Standards. We lost the planning residential development. What did that get us instead? An ordinary subdivision with single dedicated trails with no contribution to the community services, lands, parks, trails, or recreation. Nothing. Loss of premium 70-acre park by Seymour Bay. What did you get instead? Well, no parks, nothing, and no commitment to the community or the recreational facilities. And then what about loss of green belts? What did we get instead? Only the minimum 5% open space. Loss and protection of environment in sensitive areas. What did we get instead? Nothing. Not even the protection for the bald eagle's nest, wetlands, or other habitat areas that were preserved in the original plan. What did we, loss of treatment? The loss of treatment of the community water system. What did we get instead? Drilled wells. Loss of temporary sewage treatment, or tertiary sewage treatment, the best treatment available. What did we get instead? Septic systems on each lot. Loss of control of design, the siding, the tree retention, slope retention, visual aesthetics,
Rodney,
building
wrap it up
materials.
pretty soon here, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
At any rate, nothing. And we go on with the same thing, from Viso Hydro to paved roads. We got nothing from it. I don't know why we're still trying to pay them money.
Thank you.
Glenn Cormier?
Try to keep this down to about 3 minutes or so. And
Talk fast.
yeah.
Glenn Cormier, 1526 Eagle Cliff Road. Mayor and Council, Island Trust Executive, thank you for some time. Further to my letter dated February 9th of 2019, addressed directly to Islands Trust Chair Peter Luckham, and copied to Bowen Island Council, I wish to again reiterate my opposition to the proposed 13% increase to Bowen Island's contribution to the Island Trust budget for the coming year. I am at a sincere loss to be able to reconcile how such an increase is justified and why Bowen Island is continually being asked to pay substantially more each year. Bowen Island operates as an independent municipal government with its own official community plan and land use bylaw that have been approved by and reflective of the mandate given to Islands Trust Council. Our local government manages its own planning services and ensures the spirit of the trust mandate is adhered to. I'm a supporter of the Islands Trust role, especially in regards to land conservancy. I believe that Bowen Island should be involved in the trust, and I can appreciate the need for some administrative funding for its continued operation. What I struggle to understand is why Bowen Island is required to pay more when the highest expenditure on the budget is in relation to community planning, of which we have no need. It is plainly obvious that the financial burden imposed on Bowen Island should be reduced rather than increased. I believe that the future relationship between Bowen Island and the Islands Trust is very much dependent on this happening. I urge our mayor and council to stand firm on this resolve or risk having its relationship and involvement with the Islands Trust challenged by our community. Thank you.
Colleen O'Neill. Hello, Mayor, Council, and members of the Islands Trust. I just want to speak to a letter that I sent to Michael and the municipality about just the financial situation of many of the nonprofits on the island. So I'd like to add a perspective about money spent from our limited coffers. Every year, Caring Circle, which is a health resource center I run, Caring Circle and many other organizations apply for community grants. There is about $140,000 in this bucket, and it has to be spread across a wide spectrum of nonprofits, which depend on these funds for their existence. Almost $83,000 of that total is allocated off the top to core grants for the museum and the Arts Council. That leaves $57,000 for all the other nonprofit groups on the island who are doing the work that immeasurably enriches our community, and we compete for those funds. So last year, that $57,000 was distributed among Caring Circle, the Community School Association, Family Place, the Health Center Foundation, Heritage Group, Community Lunch Program, Snug Cove House, Tiernanog, Gymnastics, the Library Society, Animal Welfare Group, and a Housing Society. As a past chair of the Bowen Island Municipal Granting Committee once suggested at a public meeting, Bowen Island Municipality should consider increasing this bucket of money as the competition for these grants is difficult for the granting committee with such limited funds and there are so many worthwhile applications. But apparently our financial challenges are such that we can't afford to increase the amount we allocate for community grants. Imagine what work could be accomplished on Bowen through the nonprofit sector, with most of the work being done by volunteers, if we had even a small portion of the $320,000 we allocate to Islands Trust for the work that they do on our behalf. Thank you. Mary Anderson?
Hello.
Right here.
How you doing?
Good.
I didn't just scratch it down real quick. I'll be real quick. I'm against the Islands Trust for wasting the money in just wages. I asked last year at council if it was there, where the money goes, if they built the trail. I was told that they maybe help protect the beach down here, the sponge reef. I imagine Adam Tater probably discovered. And if anybody's going to protect that, that'll be Oceans and Fisheries Canada. I don't mind paying the money. I don't care if we paid more money to the Islands Trust, but it should be called Bowen Islands Trust Fund. All the money that's collected is spent on Bowen Island. It could be used for the medical center, so many other things here, your fire hall, and well money that's spent. And another thing that I also think the Islands Trust, if they talk about protecting the forest, you should bring in your own forest management plan here. You see the kids coming over here camping all the time. Bowen Island's a tinderbox. There should be a campground here, just have some fire access roads put in, but it should be done by even if the Islands Trust was gonna do it, somebody's gonna have to come up with a game plan, and that's gonna be more money spent. So if you did organize it and just did it yourself, I think you'd be farther ahead. And I just think we should opt out, but I think we should still pay it, but the money should stay on board. I don't mind paying more even.
All right, Gary, I'll hold you to it. Thank you very much. Is that info? Okay, well, thank you very much, members of the public. So just very quickly, I'd like to welcome our Islands Trust representatives here. And it's so nice to have you here on the island. I'm glad it was a nice day for you and all the rest of it. Some familiar faces in there, of course. Always very nice. I thought we might just do a little round table here, just to sort of tell who everybody is and the function of the trust and that sort of thing. And start with me. I'm the mayor. Oh yeah, Gary Ander. Yeah.
Right this way. Allison Morris, counselor.
David Hawking, councillor.
Maureen Nicholson, also councillor.
Michael Cahill, councillor and Islands Trust trustee.
Rob Wyman, councillor.
Kathy Lalonde, CAO.
Hope Dallas, co-officer. I'm Kate Emmings, and I work as the manager with the Islands Trust Conservancy.
I'm Clare Frater, and I work as the Director of Trust Area Services for Islands Trust.
I'm Julia Mobbs, I'm the Director of Admin Services.
And I'm Russ Hotsenpiller, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of the Islands Trust.
I'm Laura Patrick, elected trustee on Salt Spring Island and vice chair of Islands Trust Council.
I'm Sue Ellen Fast, I'm Bowen counselor and vice chair of the Islands Trust Council.
And I'm Peter Luckham. I'm elected on Thetis Island, and I'm the chair of Trust Council. Pleasure to be here.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, if I could also introduce our other two senior managers, Daniel Martin, our manager of planning and development, and Raj Hera, our chief financial officer. There just wasn't any room at the table.
No room at the end. Anyway, Kira, I'll pass it over to you. If you've got some words of introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I do have a few words. And so good afternoon, Mayor, councillors, and Bowen community members. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on Coast Salish territory, particularly that of the Squamish people. I'm grateful to be able to live and work here. I'm also very glad to be here with you. Our protocol calls for us to meet with you annually. We've not always been able to meet, and I hope that we can this term. I think it's important. I am very pleased that Councillor Fast has been elected as Vice Chair of Council. She works closely with me, the other members of Executive Committee, and senior staff to carry out the daily business of the Islands Trust. Councillor Fast's place on Executive Committee will definitely improve our awareness of Bowen Island and Bowen Council. I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Sue Ellen. I want to share a few thoughts with you that I hope will stimulate a thoughtful dialogue about the greater good for all the islands in the Salish Sea, which geographically, correct or not, in my Islands Trust context, includes Georgia Strait and House Island. Bowen Island Municipality is a full member of our family, the Islands Trust. That is by design. 2 elected representatives from your island sit on the Islands Trust Council and are full voting partners in all aspects of the Federation's work that includes policy development, budget approval, local planning issues that affect all the islands except Bowen. The Preserve and Protect mantra, which we hold high, is a shared responsibility, and again, that is by design. This responsibility has been given to the Islands Trust by the province of British Columbia and enacted by the Islands Trust on behalf of all British Columbians. This is not a whim, it is by design. A vitally important element of that design is that development, or more to the point, taxation revenues derived from property development do not contribute directly to the Islands Trust operations or decision-making. Land use decisions are based on the policy statement directives which support the Islands Trust object, Trust Council's guiding principles, ecosystem preservation and protection, stewardship of resources, and sustainable communities. We at the Islands Trust have fallen into the habit of referring to ourselves as 13 trust areas and Bowen Island Municipality. I have often thought that we are 14 local governments, including Bowen Island Municipality. It is not clear to me why the distinction when it comes to the core mandate of the Islands Trust, which is to preserve and protect. The Islands Trust is a federation of 14 local governments: Bowen Island, Thetis Island, Salt Spring Island, Main Island, Gabriola, Galliano, Hornby, Denman, Gambier, Balinas, Winchelsea, North and South Pender, Saturna, Lasqueti, and dozens of other populated islands, and hundreds of other islands and islets. I am passionate, as I know many of our staff and residents are, about this amazing place that we live in and the responsibility that rests on our collective shoulders to preserve and protect this special place for all British Columbians. All of our shoulders, Trust Council, each of the 14 local governments, 26 trustees, 7 Bowen councillors, and 35,000 residents and property owners of the trust area. The trust area was identified as warranting special care some 50 years ago, and legislation creating the Islands Trust was enacted 45 years ago. None of us, and I'm speaking of the 14 local governments, work alone. We all ideally work in concert with each other, with First Nations, with other levels of government, various agencies, NGOs, and other organizations to preserve and protect this amazing place. No matter which island or sea we are on, if you look across the horizon or across the sea to an adjacent island, some near and some far, what you see is the Islands Trust area. It is who we are. It is what we preserve and protect together. None of us live here in isolation. We can't. We live here in a symbiotic relationship with each other and the natural environment that surrounds us all. The Salish Sea surrounds us all. We have much in common. One thing that I know we can agree upon is that this is a special place, not just in British Columbia, but around the globe. So let's cut to the chase. What does the Islands Trust do for Bowen Island? In a few minutes, our CAO, Russ Hotsenpiller, and our staff are going to fill you in on the details, so I'm just going to get to the main point. We preserve and protect. I like to think we have got your back, as we do each of the other 13 local governments that are members of the Islands Trust. Through the policy statement, we watch your back while you have your boots on the ground doing the important work of community building, managing development, and creating healthy, sustainable communities. The Islands Trust takes the long view, the 10,000-foot view. We create and implement policy, regulation, and guidelines that protect habitat, shorelines, and terrestrial ecosystems that contribute to the health of the entire Salish Sea, including Howe Sound. We advocate to senior governments with a unified voice on important issues that affect us all: agriculture, shipping, logging, water, and housing, to mention but a few. We are a family of islands. We stand together to protect this place together, not just for ourselves, but for all British Columbians, for species at risk, for the environment, for the oceans and all the creatures that dwell here, and of course, our communities. This is the mandated responsibility of the Islands Trust. Bowen Island shares in the wealth of a protected Islands Trust area. We are proud of this, and it is, honestly, what gets me up in the morning. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you very much, Peter. And words well said. Absolutely no problem with that. So we're going to go on to new business. And we got 3.2 there, which is the Islands Trust financial requisition. So I've got some notes too. They're much along the same lines, but it's more about the requisition in our situation. You know, Bowen Island works with all our partners. We got BC Ferries, TransLink, Metro, Islands Trust, School District 45. These are all our partners. These partners, we have relationships. TransLink, 96% of the requisition goes to our island transport. 96% of what we pay TransLink goes right onto the island. And there's also some advocacy there. They've helped us out in some areas. And that also includes all the bridges and infrastructure, everything that we use. A lot of us, well, not me necessarily, but a lot of people use all the transportation systems in Metro Vancouver, and that's all, a lot of it is carried on by and maintained by TransLink. Metro maintains Crippen Park on the island, and it covers, which covers most of the tax we pay to Metro. So here's where the frustration with some of our community members lies. From 2014 to 2019, 55% compounded increase in the requisition for Bowen Island. 2015 to 2018, which is the only one I had numbers for, 37% increase in Bowen Island, 3% in the rest of the Trust Council islands, which, and you gotta take my numbers, but I think they're fairly accurate. 2017 to 2018, 20% increase in some of the islands area.
That's my trick, not yours.
No, can't have it this time. Unlike other partners, we have nothing tangible to show for our increase except advocacy, which we appreciate that. We got in on the forest thing here and the tankers and everything else, all the waters around House Sound, there's absolutely no question that we appreciate that. And which is, and it's also very hard to monetize. That's the other thing, is we don't, we can't put a number on that, there's no question. And there's really no tangible return on investment. If we were not to pay our 326 requisition this year, there would be zero change to Bowen Island, sort of physically, or something that we can put our hands on. We're all feeling budget constraints from senior government downloads. 326,000 K represents $5.3 million financing, which would give us the ability to pay for our new fire hall and community center financing shortfall with money left over. Islands trustee Michael Kale formerly requested a review of our requisition and was not responded to, and what showed up was a 13% increase. So you understand how that reflects sort of on our relationship. And like I say, in any relationship, if it's not working, and we've got a lot of public feedback that says, where is our money going, and what do we see, what do we get for our money, which is the biggest argument, there's no question about that. And I think, like in any relationship, we gotta try to fix it, we gotta try to mend it. And that's the first thing we have to do, and if we can't do that, then we've got to part company, which I don't, hopefully we're ever gonna get there, because we do appreciate what you do. But there has to be some kind of a look at the financing and that sort of thing, because especially with these numbers, where we saw a 23% increase or something, 21% increase, I guess, and a lot of the other islands went down, and I think that was 2017, 2018. And that's tough when we don't see the other side of it. But I do appreciate what you're saying, and I love the trust, and I like what they do, and advocacy and everything, but we do have to look at the requisition numbers, if we can possibly do that. So that's kind of it for me. Michael, have you got anything to add there?
Yes, I think
Michael
I probably would disappoint if I hadn't. Chair Luckham, CEO of Hotsenpiller, your arrival's been eagerly awaited. Let's just go back 2 years, 2017. In 2017, our requisition was 243,000. The anticipated requisition, if it's approved at our trust meeting next week, takes us up to 332,000. In 2 years, that's an increase of just under 90,000. Now, let's look at 330-odd thousand for a moment. The term of this council is 4 years. Let's simply multiply 333 by 4, and we come up to a figure that equates somewhere very close to $1.3 million. And if this rate of requisition continues or is exceeded, that is what you will requisition from this island during the course of this council. Now, were you so gracious as to give the money back? Not an altogether impossible suggestion. I can tell you, we could turn that money into a 30-year loan paying principal and interest. And we could turn that into $6.5 million. That's what we could do with $330,000 a year. And believe it or not, $6.5 million makes a major contribution to our much-needed community centres, to our health centres, our Cross-Island Trail, and numerous other projects. And I think those numbers, which so adequately speak for themselves, are the reason you have been the recipient of so many letters. Now, those letters vary from the angry and annoyed and the downright outraged to the people who still continue to support, and there are many, the aims and aspirations of Islands Trust. If I may, in 3 sentences, I'm going to take the one which I think reflects the moderate point of view. The Trust is like a parent whose children were well brought up. They should be looking at easing back, realising distant oversight from Victoria is less needed as the local government has matured. The Muni, facing its 20th year, is performing many of the functions of old days trust. The letter asks, please find a way to honour Bowen as a successful, autonomous community within the Trust, exacting less than $330,000 from us would be a good start. I can only echo those sentiments, and I think any other words in excess of that is purely gratuitous, and I rest my case.
Thank you, Michael. Maureen?
I just want to clarify a couple of things. The first point is that there is no resolution before council at this point regarding withdrawal from the trust.
Correct.
So some of the dynamic of the community conversation has been at a level of franticness that isn't warranted given the position that we are at as far as council decision making. The other point is that, to the best of my understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected, the percentage that is obtained from requisition from Bowen Island is a percentage that is established by provincial legislation. And the Trust Council has no latitude as to how much is requisitioned because it's embedded in law. At the same time, I agree with a lot of the feedback that we have received that this is getting a bit much. It would be good for the amount that was being requisitioned to be lower. We certainly could do all sorts of things with that money. We could do all sorts of things with translate money. We could do all sorts of things with money, period. But at this point, what we're looking at, if we want to make progress on this and redefine a relationship with Islands Trust, if there's a decision that that's appropriate, that's a long-term process. It will take a while. It's not going to be sorted out lining up on one side or the other of an argument and pushing their perspectives, their valid perspectives on both sides. But it comes down to a matter of being constrained by legislation, by the timing not allowing for anything that's particularly deft in this situation. And, well, I'll stop there. I said enough.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thanks, Gary, and thank you, Peter, and thank you for all coming. And I want to thank everybody for all the letters. There are a lot of letters, and interesting reading, lots of different, well, 3 different positions, I guess. People who are concerned, as Maureen said, about even our membership in the trust, others obviously supporting it, and others supporting it but worried about the money. And I personally support our membership in the Islands Trust. I support the work the trust is doing. There's a lot of work that's very valuable for us right now. Conservation, ecological protection in changing times, in a time of crazy climate extremes is really difficult, and appreciate all the help we get. However, I have a specific question about on the money side. And correct me if I've got this wrong, but it seems that our tax requisition is based on property values, so that we are 18.7%. We represent 18% of the net property value, I guess, in the Islands Trust. But we're only about 10% of the population. So basically we're taxed at close to twice the rate that we should be taxed. So as Maureen says, I know that's in legislation, but I can't for the life of me understand why we would be taxed based on property values rather than population. And perhaps you can answer that question, but if not, let's see what we can do to change the legislation so that we don't have people upset on Bowen feeling that we're paying more than our share compared to other folks.
A couple of things, I guess. I'm hoping nobody is surprised by the amount of letters, because I have been saying for years, how do I explain to our constituents what happens with all this money? David's quite right, it's a formula set by legislation. And the allocation of revenues through assessed values is a tried and true, as Russ will say, agreed, provincial method of allocating things. When they first came out with the policing tax, they allocated an amount to the province on the basis of assessed values. Metro set up a subcommittee on policing tax, of which I was a member, and we were fortunate to convince them to split it up on the basis of population and assessed values. And that did make quite a difference, because the assessed values of the Lower Mainland and Capital Regional District in Kelowna were huge compared to up north and some of the smaller areas on the island and so forth. So it is a tried and true. It's pretty hard to change. Metro allocates their allocation to us on the share of assessed values as well. So, and all the regional districts do that. So it's very tried and true and very difficult to change, as everything is. But it's worth it. You know, it's not difficult to run the numbers to see if it, you know, we ran a bunch of numbers for the policing one to see if it made a difference. And I guess it is legislated, but the trust has some control over what goes into the 3 pots. What goes into the trust council pot, and what goes into the trust conservancy pot, and what goes into the local planning pot. And I would hope that they would err on the side of more to local planning.
Rob, have you got any comments down there?
I'm good with some.
Okay, so,
Yeah, I'll just, thanks everybody for your comments, and I'm looking forward to the presentations of staff. I just wanted to say a couple things. I think we're in a position this year to find more useful ways to work together to make both sides stronger. And if we can accomplish more together, I think we might be in a position to suggest together to the province to increase the provincial grant that comes to the Islands Trust, which over the past 20 years has decreased, which I think is part of the issue. And that would be a useful thing, I think, that we might look towards doing together. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to staff if I can, or whoever else is going to speak, because those are the most important parts.
Yeah, I agree with you, and to that point, it is legislated, the whole formula is legislated, it is based on assessed values, and fortunately, we got our big sister over there 20 minutes away, and that puts a lot of pressure on the assessed values over here. So, and that's where the sort of, where it becomes, I think, it goes out of whack between the two of them. But that's a system we have to live with, and, well, at the current time. But maybe it could be sort of modernized. I think that would be the answer. To you, Peter?
Well, just 2 things. Staff have a fairly well thought out presentation for you that will certainly answer some of the questions, or at least provide information with respect to this. I'm just going to say that I was also surprised by the last year's and this year's request, but the numbers, that's how the math has come out, and so just let you know that with respect to Councillor Kale, Trustee Kale, comment that he had written to us to ask for an investigation, for want of a better word, into this. I just want you to know that that investigation has been underway since the time you brought that up to us, and it has been before Financial Planning Committee, and staff have been charged, Julia Mobbs, with looking at the formula, because indeed we are all concerned about it. It needs to be fair, and if there's something wrong with it, we want to fix it, absolutely. And so that's what we're doing, and staff are going to reveal that information to you. But let's work together on all of this. Not only the financial opportunities, but the preservation and protection opportunities.
Well,
I appreciate being here.
I think we have to. You can't go on those kind of increases, and I don't think the situation is going to change over here.
Sure.
The assessed values are just going to
If I may say so, I'm delighted to hear the chair saying that. And as this is a recorded conversation, sir, I will take great pleasure in having that part recorded and playing it back at subsequent trust meetings, because you're holding out some hope for us here. And if you're holding us out some hope that the review is going to be thorough and the review is going to be meaningful and fair, then I accept that on face value, and I look forward to seeing the fair and positive and meaningful results to follow.
That's all that we can ask. All right, so I think we'll move on to 3.3, and that's up to you, Russ.
Oh, thanks very much,
Take it
Mr.
away.
Mayor and Chair Luckham. It's great to be here, Kathy as well, and members of the community. It's great to be back on Bowen Island. I want you to know I represent the administration of the Islands Trust, and we work on behalf of Trust Council. We're here certainly every time when we sit down and we work through the budget every year, and in fact every time we walk down a hallway and someone's got to spend $1, the first question that gets asked at the Islands Trust is, how does this affect the Bowen requisition? It's an ever-present and continuous concern of ours at inside the organization. So what you're communicating to us and to me, it does not fall on deaf ears. No one wants to be associated with something that seems like it's gone out of whack or isn't appropriate, so we're vigilant in that, and will continue to be so. So I think as well as discussing the municipal requisition, we also have an opportunity to increase our understanding and talk between each other. Us to explain the Islands Trust isn't always the easiest thing to understand, so my colleagues and I would like to spend 30 minutes or 35 minutes walking you through some of the core elements of the organization, responding to your questions. I'll start us off. We've got a little video that we provide to people who are trying to understand the trust, a bit of a testimonial, and then we're happy to get into the hard discussions and the questions that you want. We'll end with Julia here, who's going to take us through the requisition. And just based on the conversation, I think you're going to come out of this conversation feeling that there's more on the table and a greater understanding. So the relationship between members of the trust, such as Bowen Islands, is very important to Trust Council and the administration. Of course, you've heard that the mandate is to preserve and protect the trust area, its unique amenities, environment. There's no form of governance like this that I'm aware of in the country. This is a rare task that we've been handed for the last 45 years. Maybe the Niagara Escarpment Commission in Ontario, but there are not many organizations that have a mandate specifically to preserve and protect the environment. We can't measure our progress like other governments. You can't turn on the tap, or you can't go down to the rec center and go for a swim. We struggle ourselves to speak to that to members of the public and others. We measure our performance over the long term by a sustained incremental effort towards contributing towards a sustainable region. We're not perfect in this delivery, and we are trying to learn every day. We are resolute in the task that we've got in front of us, and we are open to work with all islands, stakeholders, First Nations communities, and in particular Bowen Island Municipality, to be more cooperative and have closer relationships. Believe me, we endeavor to get the costs right, And to ensure that there's fairness in our apportionment, we have 13 different jurisdictions, 14. When you put them all together, we've got a very small local trust area. And they all have different wishes. But let me tell you, every single landowner and taxpayer pays the exact same rate. Bowen Island doesn't pay more. You pay the same as those on Muscogee. If your property values are the same, you're paying the same as somebody on any of the islands, South Pender, Maine. That's a key consideration that we have to move forward with as we keep this conversation going. Our relationship is not a contractual relationship. Our relationship, you are not a client of the Islands Trust. You have helped form this organization for 45 years and hopefully well into the future. Together we've made progress. We've been instrumental in achieving provincial oil spill recovery and response capability. We've protected over 600 hectares of land under covenant that's not on Bowen Island, that Bowen has put money towards and owns a network of protected places across the Salish Sea. We've been instrumental in BC Ferries advocacy towards lower fares for island communities. We've been instrumental in establishing diluted bitumen and its chemical fate as a determinant in the Trans Mountain Pipeline proposal. We've offered testimony in front of the House of Commons Standing Committee of Transportation, Infrastructure and Communities on derelict and abandoned vessels, and we've done that on behalf of Bowen Island as well as the other local trust areas. And we've developed extensive biological and ecological mapping unique to our land base. I want the community and Bowen Council to know that all landowners within the taxing authority pay the same rate and have similar tax impacts. We will go through that this evening so that there's good understanding as we leave this meeting. When you see an increase in taxation, it is felt across the trust area. The last couple of years, Trust Council, frankly, has determined that an increase in services and their associated costs is important to deliver upon its mandate, and they've made those choices, and we've done our level best to put that program into place. That being said, it's very important to communicate our activities and our programming and how your financial contribution is determined, and we're going to do that. I think there's also an opportunity moving into the future for us to speak to maybe the larger, and of course this will be determined by Trust Council itself, to speak to Bowen Islanders directly instead of through a meeting like this. We have 4 meetings a year, and in September the intention is to have our Trust Council meeting here on Bowen Island. That could provide a really good opportunity for us to speak what we do and to get feedback directly from community. That's going to be, I think, a really good opportunity, and we look forward to partnering on how that plays out, given direction from the chair and so forth. And also we're undertaking, for those of you who follow the trust and understand it, or are interested in understanding it, we have a policy statement document. That is the ground that we walk on. It hasn't been significantly amended in many years. We're contemplating amending it. And it could have implications for Bowen Island. We're going to be back here speaking to your community specifically on that project in the near term. So there's going to be time for community to come speak to us. And now, if you don't mind, Hope, I'd like to play about a 4-minute testimonial to the Islands Trust. We love it, of course, because it's good, and not to be too cheeky, you own like 10% of this video, so take it and go out and use it as you will. And then we're going to walk into a few minutes of, I'm the boring speaker tonight, but my colleagues are going to really provide us some insight into the work we do. So if you don't mind.
My heart was touched by what the Islands Trust was. It's this very special form of government.
There's so many facets to the question of the challenges facing the Islands Trust.
The community fabric is very important. You want to keep the place special for people.
The Islands Trust deals with land use planning, so official community plans, rezoning, and how people use and develop the land. When I say what the Islands Trust is, I say it's a special purpose governing body that is unlike any other governance system, and it was put in place specifically to preserve and protect these very special islands. We have a unique mandate, I think, in the world, in that our local government and our land use planning is mandated to do so in a way that preserves and protects the environment and its unique amenities.
I find that mandate resonates with who I am and my own values, so it's a comfortable place to be. It's also a very responsible place to be. We have this beautiful
islands that we are protecting and preserving?
Preserve and protect the environment, the marine areas, land and the water, but it also applies to the communities.
Preserve and protect is a very important part, and people need to understand that although the environment is key, we're also preserving and protecting our communities.
We could have paved the way for other governments in terms of saying, hey, you know, this is important. We have definitely been on trailblazer in so many areas in terms of policy.
Islands Trust was formed initially because there was a real danger of runaway development. I think we've got what we need to fulfill that goal, but it never goes away. It's always ongoing, and there's always new and different pressures for development.
On our island, all the islands, the ecosystems are incredibly varied, fragile, and they need protection. We have the responsibility for the local planning, and keeping in mind that we want to try and keep the nature of the island in place.
Planning is what it's all about, and that's what the Islands Trust is all about.
And it works both on a local level with small local councils and on a regional level that brings us all together to look at how we can work together for the benefit of the whole region.
The Islands Trust Fund is now protecting 100 places, so that's either ownership of the land or holding the conservation covenant on land that's owned by somebody else.
There's a strong sense of connection to the place we live on. You know, people identify as islanders, people love the island, you know, and people really feel like they're stewards and have a responsibility.
We really can't do anything without it resonating and being valued by the community as well.
We need to maintain the rural atmosphere, we need to retain the island culture. I see a far greater involved First Nations, and I think that enriches us all.
We're in the beginning of learning more about our relationship with First Nations and trying to make that a right relationship. A community that's strength relies on the ability of diverse people to come together and talk and work together and hear each other out and use that ability to hear each other out to actually come to a wiser decision. How are you going to, you know, support a healthy, vibrant community while preserving and protecting this unique ecosystem? We have to adapt, and we have to keep looking at what's going on in the world, finding ways to really preserve the beauty of the islands.
So I think it's all in the word trust that I think differentiates us from your average politician, because we're responsible not just for the people that elect us, but responsible for other species and for leaving a legacy to future generations.
Well, great. Thank you very much. We had that done last year to get to UBCM as a way to explain what sometimes is a difficult thing to explain. As you turn back to the presentation, I have to do two things at once, so this is going to be a bit of a challenge. So we're going to walk through over the next half an hour a bit about the history, understanding our structure and roles, because if you're interested in the requisition, that's really where we're going to end up. It's our structure as determinant on who pays for what. We're going to talk about the policy statement. Bowen specifically, obviously, is a member of the trust. Our federation-wide services, the Conservancy, and the contribution. We start with this. Over the last 2 or 3 years, I can tell you that the Islands Trust has really put its mind towards how it's going to fundamentally alter and improve its relationships with First Nations communities. It is funding that work. Part of that work is in the trust area portion of within our structure and falls within where Bowen contributes. I think it's a profound change, and it's focused in a lot of areas. It's both in terms of looking at how our referral processes go forward, the relationships that are developed. There's over 30 First Nations communities that we engage with on a consistent basis within the trust area. So we just wanted to point that out, and the funds and programming is being directed towards this effort. Settlement, we're going into a bit of a history now. Obviously, this area was settled by the Coast Salish people, and in the mid-1800s, farmers, loggers, and fishermen, rural areas with small populations. We're familiar with what those economies were like: agriculture, forestry, and fishing, a little bit of early tourism in those days. In the 60s, we had a booming Canadian economy. Of course, we always Now we think the BC ferries existed for all time, but no, that's where the connections and the access to lands came of the development of the ferry system. And with that came concerns about unregulated development or unplanned development. At that time, the trust had a population of 3,200 people. And of course, regional governance became what regional districts provided. Previously, you had municipal centers and you had essentially rural areas with no governance associated with them. And in 64 to 66, I think the Comox-Strathcona Regional District was the first regional district. The regional districts were put in place. That being said, we have 7 regional districts within the Islands Trust area. So, though we offer land use planning and advocacy, we have tremendous variability on how regional districts provide services within the trust area. Have I communicated that well? Mm-hmm. So, we can't count on a consistency across that whole region. And indeed, when we were in the 60s, some regional districts were stepping up to the plate and trying to address these matters. Others perhaps less interested. So the couple tipping points, the first was the Mudge Island subdivisions, 185 lots. Mudge is just 2 kilometers full area, no water, no sewer, no parkland. So that's was obviously a high level of density for the area at play. It got some media attention and public attention. What followed rapidly after that was the North Pender Magic Lake subdivision, where we saw 1,200 lots, Canada's largest subdivision, $50 down at the PNE and you could get a lot, and away to the races. We had the regional districts in place, but it wasn't being effectively administered across the whole region. So I think you heard earlier one of the members of the community, I think, was speaking about the 10-acre freeze. The province put that in place. A quick 2,500 lots were created in that 4-month window between the intention of doing that and then the law being passed. Some regional districts began to get a feel for this and began some land use planning. It didn't look like it was comprehensive enough so that the legislature moved towards, and I think the idea was that these lands are more susceptible to development pressure than other lands within the province. I haven't heard anything different to that conclusion, and that they needed some protection. In '74, we got royal assent. So to the Islands Trust today, probably many of you know this or have heard some of this information in the past. We're the rare local government that has its own legislation. So, as was said earlier, Councillor Trustee Kale, Alison Morris as well, was referring to the notion that the requisition is substantially born in the Islands Trust Act and legislation. So, while we can play around the edges, we don't have the ability to make fundamental changes because it's vested in legislation. We have other acts that we work within, the Local Government Act, that middle one that you don't see that well is the Community Charter. And others. So those are the places that we do most of our work. And then the Islands Trust area itself is about 5,200 square kilometers, 25,000 residents, another 10,000 non-property resident electors, and you can see that's the extent of the area. So I'm pleased to see, and it's probably been there since 1974, but you've got the object up on the wall to preserve and protect. That's we have the same thing hanging on our wall. This is where we return every time there's a consideration. When an OCP or rezoning comes in front of our deliberative body, this is where they go to the object. And indeed, when Bowen has an OCP amendment and you send it over, it's the object that generates all of the directive policy analysis that when we respond to your bylaw referrals. The interesting thing, of course, when you, and it's somewhat shocking, is that there's the concept of it is for British Columbia generally. So that means, to some unjustly, there's the application of your tax dollar and everybody else's tax dollar to the benefit of British Columbia as a whole, and not just the areas within the local trust areas. The political structure, you see the local trust areas. They of course have land use planning power as well as general advocacy. You see Bowen Island Municipality. Trust Council, we bring all the local, 4 times a year, all of the Trust Council comes together and operates at the more federal level, coming up with broader environmental policy, broader advocacy policy, and then working with the local trust areas to do research, to do programming. And then if the local trust area, they, believe me, they consider themselves independent of the Islands Trust Council as Bowen Island does. There is significant autonomy thought of on every single island. And they can be suggested to, but they cannot be coerced. And they take those ideas and pass them or don't. So this is a very important slide, and my colleagues are going to go into a little bit more detail in a moment. Trust-wide services, that's Trust Council and Executive Committee, Islands Trust policies, advocacy and cooperation, administrative and support functions. No one likes to stand up here and talk about costs associated with administrative support and all those kinds of things, but those are real costs that are associated with delivering programming. And the Trust Conservancy Board, which acquires and manages land. Bowen Island contributes to the left side of this diagram, not the right side, which is local trust committees, community land use planning, and land use regulation. So how are we different from other local governments? We have a mandate, Part 3 of our Act, to preserve and protect. And with respect, there's no other local governments in BC that have that. So we are dedicated to that task. And second, one of the mechanisms of doing that is they separate the decision makers from land use decisions from the ability to provide hard services like sewer and water. In a municipal context, of course, there's latecomer agreements, amenity agreements. You might have a future that you've contemplated that requires taxation from development. Some densification might be needed for you to realize your dreams and your official community plans, not just Bowen, but any municipality. The Islands Trust does not have that ability. The regional districts determine what hard services are like, and the land use planning is divorced from that consideration. And obviously that was by design.
But not for Island Municipality. But not for Island Municipality.
No.
We do both.
That's right. And I think that's a key distinction. Just got a couple slides left. You'll hear us refer to the policy statement. The Islands Trust Act required that Council adopt a policy statement. It functions much like a regional growth strategy, provides the overall policies. I had a slide up, I had 5 or 6 slides up here with all the minutiae associated with that, but thought maybe that might not be where we want to spend our time today. But it has 3 main goals: ecosystem protection, stewardship of resources, healthy and sustainable communities. There are directive policies underneath all of those. When any of our local trust areas or the Bowen community sends an official community plan, the Executive Committee reviews those directive policies from the policy statement against the proposal. And they only have the ability in a very narrow area to say yes or no to that. So what does the Islands Trust Act say about island municipalities? Well, you incorporated in 1999, and your letters patent are quite provide various references to the nature of our relationship moving forward. Elections of trustees, section 13, having regard for the object of the trust, was in your letters patent, 13.1. Bowen Island is a member of the trust and shall support the object of the trust as defined by the Islands Trust Act, section 14. And it said, go out and have an agreement. And that is what we have here. It's a protocol agreement. We could probably tend this agreement a bit better, and particularly the Islands Trust could. You know, we heard that we didn't meet last year. We probably should have met last year. There are opportunities that we'll hear about today where Bowen Island could derive more value, if you want to use that word, from this relationship, and we think we can suggest what some of those things are. And this protocol agreement is how we organize ourselves. It was adopted in 2000, revised in 2010. It is approved by the minister. It's a set of agreed principles. There are not a lot of difference in values between the Islands Trust as a whole and Bowen Island. That's been demonstrated over many, many years. It talks about the financial arrangements, it talks about how we're going to disagree with each other and how we should meet, and this meeting itself is contemplated by the protocol agreement. Sorry I've done this to you, but this is the process associated with like if you're wondering how an official community, one of your official community plan bylaws is amended, this is the process. It looks relatively complex, but essentially initial discussions have with the Islands Trust. You give first reading and then you refer to the trust for some comments. This doesn't happen a lot, a tremendous amount of times, but it does occur. Executive committee will provide feedback. You then hold your public hearing. BIMS then sends the bylaws to the Islands Trust Executive Committee for approval, and it's approved and sent back. And this is my last slide. We also review other bylaws of a non-OCP nature. They're referred to the Islands Trust, and they're addressed to the Islands Trust policy statement, as I've said, and we must provide advice of any objections within 45 days. For the most part, I mean, maybe an individual landowner might say different. I think this system has worked. The referrals have been, we've never missed a deadline. For the most part, it seems that I don't think there's ever been, has there ever been maybe one instance where there's anything's being turned down by executive committee, so it's rare. And yeah, so that's my first few slides, and now I think I'm going to turn it over to Clare. And she's going to take you through the federation-wide services. So these are essentially the services that Bowen Island participates in and contributes to financially. Thanks, Clare.
Thank
you, Russ. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council and Vice Chair. It's my pleasure today to be here to talk about the federation-wide services. So these are services that were on the left-hand side of the slide, so the non-land use planning services. And so I'm going to walk you through a variety of topics and then hand it over to my colleague Kate Emmings, who's going to talk about the final two topics on the slide. So just wanted to let you know, this is a very brief overview that we're giving you here today. I could easily spend an hour, hour and a half talking about this. And should you want or need that, I'd be very happy to come back another time and provide a lot more depth to the presentation.
It's the right side of that.
There we go. So just wanted to start with talking about advocacy. So our act calls for us to work in cooperation with others, and primarily we do this through an advocacy program, but we tend to work in a very collaborative manner, and we also tend to work on programming that we can use to support others in echoing the message that we put forward on behalf of the region. We're really proud of the work that's happened in this, and I believe we have moved the dial on a number of issues, both at the national and federal level, certainly working with Bowen Island in partnership at times on certain topics. And these were the themes that Trust Council focused on last term. So we worked on ferry fares and service levels, groundwater protection, species at risk protection, a huge amount of effort towards oil spill prevention and response advocacy, a lot of work advocating against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Anchorages is not an enormous issue in Howe Sound. In the Southern Gulf Islands, it's of increasing interest around having cargo vessels come and anchor very close to people's homes with light and noise disturbance going on all night. Derelict and abandoned vessels, I know, is an issue close to the heart of Bowen Island, and we've done a lot of work in this area. Agricultural land protection was another, and aquaculture is one that's growing, particularly around Denman and Hornby Islands. As our council is heading into strategic planning, this is an area for Bowen to say what topics are important to Bowen Islanders that you'd like Trust Council to work on next term. So I think council would be very interested in hearing both from individuals and also from council itself through a resolution as to what topics should be taken up by council next term that would be of importance. One topic I'm aware of that's important to your community is Crown land logging proposals. So this was an example of something that we focused on last year, and I just wanted to walk you through, just as an example, this was one that I worked on personally when it arose. So I had the phone call from BC Timber Sales initially saying that they were planning this, and I gave them a heads up that this might not be a good idea in the Trust area, particularly on Bowen, and pointed the staff person towards the agreements that we have with the province and the policy statement that said it should guide all of their actions as per our Islands Trust Act. We then sent over all the ecosystem mapping layers to inform them about the important ecology of the region. We then immediately liaised with Bowen staff, with Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations staff, and with Squamish Nation to get an immediate action plan of what we were going to do to support Bowen Island and do our best to protect these lands. We very quickly developed this draft map that would show them the integrated nature of the region and its interconnection with protected areas, and we're prepared to value add with additional layers as needed. We had also prepared advocacy messaging in partnership with Bowen staff, so we could all go out with a united voice around what was important, both about the process and about our desired outcome. We also walked through the forest stewardship plan. We happened to have a staff member with a background in forestry, so she was able to go through it in depth and provide feedback to both Bowen staff and me. And we connected BC Timber Sales staff, provincial staff working on forest protection, trying to get some alignment there between the two arms of the province, sort of working at countermeasure against each other. So that was all done literally within about 10 days. So we can scale up quite quickly. So should there be something pressing for Bowen and it works and our executive committee says go, we can scale up and go quite quickly in support of something that's important to any community in the Gulf Islands. And I think we're there for you again. It would be, again, by resolution of council, bringing forward a request to our executive committee or council. This could be something we work on this term if it's chosen as a priority. So we also offer public programs, and again, I'm going to give this a very light treatment today. So we can undertake outreach programs, education, recognition programs. So I'm going to give you just some highlights. So one that's a beloved program of the Trust is called our Community Stewardship Awards. And this is a region-wide program where Trust Council receives nominations for islanders and community groups and businesses that have done wonderful work in the islands, and it provides an opportunity for community recognition. It also provides an opportunity for different islands communities to learn from each other. So we've had examples. There was a program on Pender called the Car Stop, where they established a car stop that was essentially carpooling on the island. And there were sort of rules of engagement about how you got picked up and what you paid and if you didn't pay. And that got replicated throughout other islands, but based on it winning an award and getting written up in local papers, that sort of thing. So it's guided by a policy. We offer it every 2 years. The awards are given out locally on the island. So on Bowen Island, we encourage council to provide the award. And this year I would expect Trust Council might do it in September when we're here. There's been 12 nominations from Bowen and 6 awards, including Trustee Fast, I understand, back in the day. And this year's nomination is April 22nd. So I encourage community and council to consider bringing people forward to council as nominees. Another example is we offer workshop series on topics that are important. And again, this is something where you can suggest something that's of interest to your community that you think might be of interest region-wide. There's a picture here in this very hall of our freshwaters workshop that we brought here in 2017. It was standing room only. I was at the back of the room there. About how to maintain a well, how to protect groundwater. And we've produced some educational brochures as well. And we're coming back here on March 30th of this year to talk about sea level rise. It'll be the last of a workshop series we've been offering in partnership with Living Oceans Society. So we look forward to being back here soon. A new program for the Trust that was launched last year is a grant and aid program focused around history and heritage. The Islands Trust Act, this is the only place where we're able to do grant and aid. And our executive committee just last year decided to start in a modest way providing some grant towards history and heritage, and we welcome applications from Bowen towards this fund. Another area where we offer federation-wide services is within intergovernmental relations. This is again with the in cooperation mandate. So we have a whole series of agreements that we can lean back into when there's an idea of conflict or a disagreement that uphold the object and often are signed by ministers or by the deputies. So when we do have disputes at the staff level or there's a misunderstanding, we can lean back into where there's agreement to uphold the preserve and protect mandate. And we Bowen is a partner in many of these, and we can uphold your interest through these agreements. And I can, as I say, with the logging, they were an example of how they might have been useful. I would say, oops, I put title there. I wanted to draw your attention. Council has adopted First Nation engagement principles that are very much guiding and changing how we operate and how we think and how we execute our business today. So I just wanted to walk you through these 3 and let you know that Council it will be considering in March a reconciliation declaration that would further deepen this commitment. So right now, the Islands Trust is committed to becoming aware of what it does not know or understand about First Nations. So there's a lot of learning happening. that it wants to prove a sincere desire for reconciliation throughout all that it does, and to integrate where possible activities that support First Nations reconnecting with the trust area lands and waters. So this is an active program, and again, I think the CIO highlighted, this is an area of growth. We've added a new position, and we're certainly dedicating a lot of energy to this commitment and trying to execute it, I think, diligently, and with an eye on long-term relationship building and reconciliation. Another highlight for you is communications. So we want to tell the story of the Islands Trust and about all of our communities and all of our ecosystems. So we do this in a variety of ways. And again, this is an area where Bowen Council could request some support, or we could integrate perhaps better at telling a joint story, and we could support your functions perhaps. So there's a variety of tools on there that we might be of interest. And I would encourage anyone who wants to know more about the Islands Trust. We have a subscriber service on the website where you can say you want to learn more, and you can sign up for our email notifications about meetings, highlights from our council meetings, all of our news releases. And it's a good way to sort of keep an eye on what's happening, and you can just choose the region-wide news. You don't have to get all the local news if that's not of interest. We undertake media monitoring, we do public engagement, we have an annual report, which I've brought one for each of the councillors here today. And again, if you're interested in what advocacy happened last year, you can have a look through that because it's all documented. Finally, just 2 annual programs for communications. These are the 2 things we do for certain, which will be the same as Bowen Island. We have our budget consultation, which is just concluded, and the results will go to council next week or 2 weeks, and our annual report. And we're very transparent. Everything's on the website, and you can go and have a look. And again, we'd like feedback at all times, and all correspondence is provided to our executive committee. And as our CIO mentioned earlier, we are undertaking a review of the policy statement, which guides all actions and decisions at Islands Trust. It's a dated document. We have some objectives we want to achieve through this project. It's an opportunity to educate people about the Islands Trust and to receive feedback and determine areas where we can strengthen our policy guidance, strengthen our advocacy reach, and just hear and revitalize the trust, modernize it. So we're really keen to come to Bowen and to all the islands to get that input. The final conclusion will be a bylaw that goes to the Minister for adoption. So in conclusion, just for this section of it, there's a variety of places where Bowen can request additional services. Advocacy, again, please come in with ideas and requests. Workshops, we'd like to hear from you. Communications, again, with First Nation relations, we'd be very happy to come over and have our senior intergovernmental policy advisor come. We'd love to work with you on the policy statement amendments. And finally, mapping, which is my cue to hand the floor over to my colleague to tell you about the mapping services that are available.
Thank you, Clare. So as mentioned, my name is Kate Emmings, and I work as the acting manager with the Islands Trust Conservancy. But the other hat that I've had on from time to time is as ecosystem protection specialist with the Islands Trust, and through that I've helped develop a lot of the mapping products. So I think that's why I got given the opportunity to tell you about the mapping that we offer through Islands Trust. So just as a quick overview, some of the GIS services that are directly offered to Bowen Island. We do have very technical licensing that we have for programs. ArcGIS licenses that we hold in. When we negotiated our contract under that kind of, under those licensing agreements, we included Bowen. So essentially, you are receiving through Islands Trust a value there for that kind of service. And I was really pleased when I arrived today. I spent some time in the planning department this afternoon, and then I arrived, they had their ArcGIS open, and the second thing they had on their screen was the Map It, or Map Islands Trust public screen as they were looking through some development proposals that were coming across their desk. So I was very happy to see that that seems to be in use at Bowen Island. So like I said, we also offer a public mapping program called Map It. And this is available through a link on the Islands Trust website, and it's available to anybody in the public. If you're interested in looking at maps of Bowen, please feel free to go ahead and take a look at it and peruse some of the data that we do have. Most of our data is up there, but not all of it. So we do have a data acquisition program, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of layers that we do offer. The first being what they call orthophotography, so air photos stitched together, which is what you see on the screen there. We have a program where we acquire these data layers and then regularly maintain them. Bowen's up for renewal and is coming up again this fall, so you should have a new air photo for the area pretty soon. All of these data layers have a value to them, of course, and can be monetized. And I think we're at over $100,000 of just Bowen Island data value at the moment. And that's purely what we've put out. When we do these projects, we also work very much in collaboration with other organizations and have pulled funding from other agencies, other governments, non-profit organizations who've helped us to fundraise for these layers. So it's not a purely just tax dollars out equation, it's actually pulling value added from other regions as well. And like I said, we do data maintenance, and then we also do offer what we call a TAPIS option, which hasn't been taken up by Bowen Island Municipality, I think largely because you are using the ArcGIS licenses, but is available. It's what we use in-house at Balance Trust. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the data layers that we do offer. One of our big layers, of course, is our ecosystems layer. And from that, we derive several products, including sensitive ecosystems. So this is a map of our full region. And of course, from that, we can draw all sorts of information that can help to inform decisions that we make going forward as Islands Trust. But we have also shared with Bowen Island Municipality and hope that you make use of and find useful in the work that you do. So some of the ecosystems, sensitive ecosystems are essentially those that if you were to do damage to them would take a lot longer to recover than other areas. And so we were able to measure how much of that we have on our landscape, how much of it is protected, and we've also kind of thrown here how much is in Crown land. And we have all those numbers from Bowen, and I've kind of passed around a sheet to Mayor and Council that shows some of the data that we do have available specifically to this. Through that data source, we also can extrapolate forest ecosystems and information about forests, including ages of the forests that we have throughout our region. And Bowen is, I think, unique in a lot of the trust area in that you still have some old forest. A lot of our area has been logged and almost to the full extent been logged. But Bowen does have little pockets, especially in the Crown land, of old forest and still a fairly robust, mature forest. So it's really lovely to see in the mapping. And of course, we can do the same thing with this data as extrapolate what's protected and what isn't. The other thing we can do with data is, of course, look at all different things. And one of the things we've done with our forest data is looked at what do we have in terms of carbon, both stored in our forests and sequestered or becoming stored in our forests. And Islands Trust has a good potential for both of these things. On Bowen, you have a lot of stored carbon, and in the sheet that I handed around, it's interesting to see that that is actually helping to take out of the atmosphere a lot of carbon from cars and other pollution-emitting sources. Finally, moving into more of the marine environment in terms of our ecosystem mapping, we do also do shoreline mapping, and most recently for Bowen we've done eelgrass and forage fish. So forage fish are small fish that are foraged upon by other species, whether they're birds or other fish or marine mammals. In particular, we looked at surf smelt and Pacific sand lance, which actually lay eggs on beaches, adhered to either sand or pebbles. And we looked for areas on Bowen that would be suitable for this type of spawning. Similarly, we looked also in those bays to see what kind of eelgrass was present there. And Bowen was actually unique for the eelgrass mapping in that we were able to partner with Metro Vancouver, who added some cash to the pot and allowed us to map the full extent of our eelgrass beds on Bowen Island. So the rest of the islands have just a linear presence or absence. Bowen has a far more robust data set. And I think the point of saying that is that in addition to the products that we're actually producing, we're actually able to talk with other agencies that are doing the similar work and pull in their expertise and their desire for these products as well. Last year we worked on shoreline mapping, so this is a little different. It's not so much ecosystem based, it's more looking at the type of substrate or the type of formations that you have along your shoreline. So we produced 3 different types of maps, one looking at shoreline structure. You won't be able to read it here, but the first one on the left is looking at, is it a hard shoreline, is it a soft shoreline, sand, pebble, gravel, larger cobbles, or a hard surface. The second map is looking at sort of the wave influence on the shoreline and where you're seeing more susceptibility to things like erosion. And then the third is really looking at the sensitivity of shorelines, both from the perspective of erosion and then also some of the shoreline ecosystems like the estuary type areas that you have on your island. And this was a project that we finished up last year. Finally, I'm going to move into the non-ecosystem-based products that we have. And these include things like dock mapping. And the reason that we do this at Islands Trust is to look at not only where we have our natural footprints, but also where we have our human footprints, so that we can start looking at planning in a way that looks at both features of the landscape. And docks has been was a big focus for us a few years ago, and we were able to map all the docks on the island. You can kind of see Bowen in there, the outline. When we did our regional conservation plan through the Islands Trust Conservancy, we also looked at disturbance and human use. So again, the lines on these maps aren't totally clear, but on the right is what we have in terms of existing human use. I'm trying to think, do you have a pointer on here? Yeah, you do. And here's Bowen, and you can kind of see the human use sort of tends to be between all your mountains and in the valleys that you have, which is probably intuitive. We mapped a variety of things, but the things that show up mostly on Bowen, of course, are the rural development, so the housing that you have in amongst all your forests, and then agriculture, and a little bit of what they call urban development, what we're calling village development when we communicate it out, but it's sort of a higher density area. And then over here we have disturbance, and we were able to show that there was about a 1% increase in human disturbance over the last 10 years. I'm going to try and speed this up a little bit so that we can get to some of the discussion at the end of the day, but we also have things like building envelope mapping that shows where all the buildings are. We find this very useful in our planning department and have provided it to ours. And protected areas mapping that we update on a regular basis. I put this up here just to show that with a bunch of data you can run analyses that inform the rest of your landscape and what's of interest on your landscape. So we take all of these layers and we analyze them to kind of give us something that tells us where the priority areas are for conservation. And that leads nicely into the talk that I'm about to give about the Islands Trust Conservancy. So the other portion of my work is working as currently as acting manager for the Islands Trust Conservancy. Our mission, we're a unique organization under the Trust, and our mission is to protect special places by encouraging, undertaking, and assisting in voluntary conservation initiatives within the Trust area. We have we're a separate corporate body, so we are actually, our decisions are made by a board, and that board consists of 3 trustees, one of which is Swell and Fast, sitting over here to my left. But we also have appointed members that are appointed by the province, so these are not elected, but come through our ministry as appointed members, and they are tasked with representing the province when it comes to land conservation. I'm going to kind of skip over this one, but just to say that the area that we work in, as I think many of you know, is very important biologically. We have a very high richness of species and a lot of ecosystems at risk, and Bowen is actually included in that consideration. We get a lot of fragmentation of habitat because we are so close to urban centers, and most of our land is privately owned. So it's really important that we work with private landowners to try and protect the land that we have left. Islands Trust Conservancy protects about 105 properties. These, of course, have financial value as well as ecological value. We're currently sitting on, well, $16 million worth of land that we own, and we think in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million of covenant lands as well. And Bowen Island is sitting very healthily in there. We do private land stewardship, so we produce information that can be used by landowners, and I encourage people to visit our website to find out more about what is there. We do conservation covenants, which are private agreements on private land, contracts essentially that say whether or not people will preserve and protect portions of the land. And we often partner with local conservancies to do this, and we monitor them annually. We do have a program called the Natural Area Protection Tax Exemption Program, which is also available on Bowen Island, which is a program where property owners can receive a property tax exemption should they put their land into a covenant. And if you want more information about that, I can talk about that ad nauseum. We do have covenants that we hold on Bowen Island, 2 of them at the moment. Well, one of them has more than one property. We have nature reserves, 29, almost 660 hectares, many of which, or 3 of which are on Bowen. There we are. Most recently, our most recent acquisition on Bowen was the Ferry Fen Nature Reserve, which occurred in 2010. We have an opportunity fund, so similar to Trust Council, which has a granting program for heritage, we have an opportunity fund for conservation, and we've awarded in the last 10 years just over $76,000 for that, and it's to fund hard to fundraise costs at the very beginning and outset of conservation initiatives. And then finally, just my last 2 slides, we do a lot of regional conservation planning. So I do have a copy, and I'm happy to leave it with Bowen, of our full regional conservation plan. We worked very closely with Bowen on this. I worked with you because you were going through a parks planning process at the same time, so we shared a lot of information back and forth. And through this, we did a lot of engagement. I couldn't find the Bowen people, but you were there at this meeting. And the goals of this plan came out as identifying, investigating, and communicating about important natural areas, strengthening relationships with First Nations, continuing to secure and manage land, and then finally building internal and shared organizational strength. And I think that goes for working with Bowen Island Municipality as well. Like Islands Trust, we have a website, and if you are interested in keeping up on our work, you can sign up and subscribe to our e-news and also follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now we're going to turn to Julie Mobb. She's going to walk us through the municipal contribution.
Thank you, Russ. So I've introduced myself already. Again, I'm Julia Mobbs, the Director of Administrative Services for the Islands Trust. I've been with the Trust for just over a year. This is my first opportunity to visit Bowen Island, so I'm very grateful to be here. Thanks for having us. I have the not so enviable task this evening of speaking to the municipal contribution. It can be a bit of a daunting topic to address, but I'll do my best to explain the overall concept in a way that's understandable for us all. Let's see if I can work this. So the topics we'll touch on today related to our contribution, we'll look at a few relevant literatures. We'll look at the principles that are applied to the municipal requisition within those bodies of literature. Of course, we'll look at the proposed fiscal 2019-20 Bowen Island requisition. And then we'll review some of the factors that are influencing the changes that we're seeing in the Bowen Island levy. The first piece of literature we'll look at that speaks to the municipal contribution is the Islands Trust Act. Section 47(2)B speaks to the portions of the Islands Trust budget that municipalities within the trust area will contribute to. As you can see there, those areas are the operations of Trust Council and the Executive Committee, and also the administrative operations of the Islands Trust Conservancy. Section 47(6) gives us the basis upon which these costs will be shared. And as some of the speakers tonight have mentioned, the costs are shared on the basis of converted value of land and improvements within the trust area. or the property values within the municipal areas and the local trust areas. The second piece of literature we'll look at is Trust Council's Policy 7.2.6. This is the municipal tax requisition calculation. It was adopted in 2004 to codify the principles that are outlined in the Act and to provide some clarity around the calculation of the requisition. So you can see in the previous slide, there's not a lot of detail in the legislation around how exactly to apply these principles. There's no formula that's given to us in the Act, and so the policy gives us that formula. As I said, it was adopted in 2004. It was reviewed and amended in 2012 to reflect some changes that happened to the Islands Trust accounting software. It was again reviewed and amended in 2018 to reflect a change in how our non-cash expense item of amortization would be treated. And this year, we've received direction from Financial Planning Committee to review the policy again with the concept of fairness in mind. And that's making sure that the levy that we are requisitioning from Bowen Island is fair and equitable when compared with the other local trust areas. And it's worthy to note that all changes to this policy are reviewed by Bowen Island Municipality under our referral processes. So there's no changes that Bowen Island is not made aware of and has a chance to voice their opinion on. So the principles, the shared principles that we see in those two pieces of legislation, or two pieces of literature, sorry, are that municipalities in the trust area will contribute to all trust council expenditures with a few exceptions. Some of the exceptions relate to things like elections expenses for local trustees, as of course Bowen Island elects their own councillors, so they should not be contributing to those expenses. Elected officials, liability insurance, things like that. There's small exceptions within there. Under the umbrella of trust council expenses is the work of trust area services. That's our advocacy work that Claire spoke on earlier, and the work of executive committee. Bowen Island will also contribute to the Islands Trust Conservancy expenditures as well. That's all of the Islands Trust Conservancy expenditures. As well, they will contribute to a percentage of administration expenses. So understandably, no service can be delivered without some overhead. There has to be some back-end services that are supporting the products that are being delivered, the services that are being delivered. And so a portion of our administration expenses is also funded in the Bowen Island levy. Our administration expenses are allocated based on the percentage of the budget that each of our service areas makes up. So for example, if Trust Council comprises 18% of the Islands Trust budget, they will also wear 18% of our administration expenditures. And as noted, there is no contribution to local planning service expenditures. This is a visual breakdown of the proposed Islands Trust 1920 budget. So you can see the majority of the Islands Trust budget is related to local planning services. 73% of our budget is for local planning. Islands Trust Conservancy is 11% of our proposed budget, and Trust Council is 16% of our proposed budget. And the administration costs have been applied to each of those buckets there. So Bowen Island Municipality will be contributing to the 11% plus 16% for 27% of the Islands Trust budget. This slide here may be a little bit difficult to read. Essentially what it is showing is that the breakdown of the Islands Trust budget service areas changes over time. So this slide goes all the way back to fiscal 98. I think that was the year just before Bowen's incorporation. And in fiscal 98, local planning services made up 81% of the Islands Trust budget. Fast forward to today, and local planning services has dropped and is only 73% of the Islands Trust budget. Trust Council has grown, Trust Council has grown from 14% to 16%, and the Islands Trust Conservancy budget has grown from 5% to 11%, so they're now making up 11% of the Islands Trust budget. So the two pieces of the Islands Trust budget that Bowen Island is contributing to are growing, while the portion of the Islands Trust budget that Bowen Island is not contributing to is shrinking. That's in relative terms, of course, not dollars terms. The factors that influence the Bowen Island levy, there are several. Of course, the service areas that Bowen is contributing to, as they grow, the levy to Bowen Island will also grow. So as trust council expenditures grow, that will generally increase the levy. As the Conservancy expenditures grow, that will increase the levy. As our administration expenditures related to those two service areas grow, the levy will also increase. As we saw on the previous slide, the change in proportions within the Islands Trust budget will also have an impact on the levy. Net converted assessments is something that can have a substantial impact on the amount that is levied to Bowen Island. So again, that's legislated. We can't apply the levy at this point in any other way. Bowen Island does make up 18.7% of the property value pie within the Islands Trust. That is a substantial amount. I think that's second only to Salt Spring Island. And so they are wearing a fair amount of the levy because of that. Other revenue sources will also influence the amount that's being requisitioned, as of course if we have other revenue sources, we don't have to create revenue from taxes. So if we have transfers from surplus in any given year, Bowen Island is given a credit for those surplus transfers, and so that would reduce the levy. Provincial grant revenues, of course, also helps to reduce our levy. Our provincial grant revenues have been pretty stagnant for the last few years. I think we're hoping that that may change moving forward, but for now it is what it is. That does generate a bit of a credit to Bowen Island. Grant income that's not related to our local trust committees also generates a credit for Bowen Island, and any investment income is also apportioned out as a credit as well. Moving on to the proposed fiscal 2020 Bowen Island requisition, the hot topic of the day. So this is coming in at roughly $330,000. It is a proposed increase of 12% from the prior year. That's about $36,000. Built into that, which we haven't been very good about communicating, is the fact that some of this increase will be due to growth and development. So this is what's called the non-market change within the property value. So what it is where there's growth in properties, there's now more properties to tax. So 1% of this 12% is attributable to new property growth and not to a true growth in the levy. So that's worth mentioning. Some factors that are contributing to the increase in the proposed levy is a fairly sizable increase in our trust council budget. It's increased by $69,000, which results in an increase of $13,000 that is borne by Bowen Island. That's due mainly to a communications project and a website refresh project that we are budgeting for, and that will be going forward to Trust Council next week to determine if that will be included in the budget. That's the largest factor, or one of the largest factors that's contributing to the increase. Trust Conservancy is also seeing an increase of about $100,000. We have a new staff position that we're hoping will be funded. As we've noted, our Conservancy work is growing, and it's very important work, and so we've identified that we need some more staffing resources there. So that's generating a $20,000 increase in the levy. Our administration expenses have actually decreased. However, there has been an increase in the amount of administration costs that are being allocated to Trust Council and Conservancy because they've grown. So the impact of that decrease is not as substantial as one might hope. It's only generating a $1,000 decrease. There's been no change in the converted assessment values for Bowen Island since last year. They are remaining stable at 18.7%, so not much of an impact from that. We have seen a substantial reduction in the amount of our work that is being funded by surplus funds. So what that means is that there are far fewer credits being applied to Bowen Island, as well as the other local trust areas. And so without these credits, it does drive up the levy to some extent, and so there's a $5,000 increase being generated there. This slide just gives a brief overview of the Islands Trust financial plan history. So I've got 5 or 6 years up on the slide there, and as you can see, the Islands Trust budget has been increasing. Let me pull out the pointer here. Is it here? There we go. So over here, our 5-year change. This tells you how the Islands Trust budget has changed over the last 5 years. We can see a 15% increase in Trust Council expenditures, and I will just note for those paying attention that the Trust Council expenditures have been adjusted for those exceptions that I did mention previously. So we've had a 15% increase in council expenditures over 5 years. We've had a sizable increase in the Conservancy expenditures of 26%. There's been a 9% overall increase in admin expenses over the same 5 years. There's no number here indicating that the 5-year change for surplus funds, as they tend to just swing any which way, but you can see in fiscal 2018 and 2019 there was a sizable amount being drawn from our surplus funds, and it's quite reduced in the 2020 fiscal budget. The admin pool rate, not a substantial change, but it does of course impact the levy. It's a 1.8% change over the 5 years. And Bowen's percentage of the property value pie, if you will, has increased 4.1% over 5 years. So there was a substantial increase from 2017 to 2018 from 16.2% to 18.7%, and it's remained fairly stable at 18.7%. And that's all that I have up on the slides today. I will just touch briefly on the concept of fairness. I know that's been a question that's come up. And as mentioned before, Islands Trust Financial Planning Committee has tasked staff with looking at the municipal calculation to see if there is an inequity between what is being levied to Bowen Island versus what is being levied to the other local trust areas. I have started this work. But it's still in the preliminary stages. We're not yet in a place where we're going to put it out in a report. So, but certainly as those findings come up, they will be shared.
So, Mr. Mayor, we turn it back to you. That's hopefully some of that's helpful to you.
It's extraordinarily helpful. Thank you very
Can we
much.
ask questions?
Great presentation, absolutely. Go ahead, Michael.
Julia, firstly, thank you for this, right? That's probably the most succinct, but for better or for worse, whether we like it or not, that is probably the most defined presentation we've had in this community. So whether I like it or not, too bad. It's a well laid out presentation. I just want to go over some total figures. Going from your budget history, just to give some idea of the size of Islands Trust, your expenditure budget this year is 7.7 million.
A little over, yes.
Little over, well, that's worth around 100,000. Of that 7.7, your staff and staff-related costs are somewhere in the region of 5 million something.
They generally sit at about 50% of our budget.
The staff and staff-related costs are 50% of the 7.7.
Yeah, they tend to be around
Staff-related
4.
costs is an interesting term. Could you define it a little bit better for us?
Well, it's impossible to employ people without having costs of employment. It's like saying half a person. It's difficult. So if you employ somebody, you also employ them, and you also take on the cost that they must incur to do the job they're allocated to do. So therefore, if you employ somebody, you employ them with the costs.
You're referring to things like office space and desks?
Well, whatever it might be, you employ somebody. If their employment has incremented the costs, then that's the cost. Their travel, their expenses, and everything else. So I'm saying I was led to believe from some letters I was reading, which you have copies of, that the total cost of the payroll is somewhere in the region of 5 million. I'm only interested, well, I'm particularly interested because when we became a municipality, your expenditure budget was in fact under 4 million. So it now sits at 7.7, just to give some magnitude and grasp on the size of the organisation that we're talking about. It is a $7.7 million organisation. And whilst you break it down individually, it doesn't show the more holistic picture of just how much is involved. And I'm hoping that those breakdowns, which cross all the divides and all the activities, can be shown so we can look at totals. Because once you break it down by silo, it is so hard to remember 2 slides ago, the individual numbers, but the total numbers for the audience, for mayor and council, are far more easier to grasp. So it's a $7.7 million organisation, which when we became a municipality was a 3.8. Thank you.
Russ?
Yeah, first off, I'd like to echo Trustee Keel. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm new on council, so trying to learn IT, and I was really looking forward to you coming here and explaining this to me and clarifying some things that I've been hearing through letters and whatnot, and hearing it straight. Pardon me for the horse's mouth, but I'll leave it at that. Couple things. One thing, Russ, you know, your comment that, you know, we're not a client of the Island Trust, but we helped form it, we're part of it, we are the Island Trust.
Absolutely.
I like that lens, and I appreciate that lens, and you giving, and the suggestion to have some more meetings on Bowen, I think that would be fantastic, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what the Island Trust does, and that creates confusion, and then people start going, why are we in this, what are we getting out of it, yada, yada, yada. So I think that that would be a great move forward to have more. And I know it takes quite a bit to come here. My wife is like, I hope they're staying overnight, you don't have to go all the way back tonight, so I hope you are. And Claire, you know, your points about the crown logging, which was a huge point here, and it was nice hearing a bit of the background that you were doing, because I didn't know that. I didn't know your involvement with that, and I think a lot of people here really appreciated that, you know, sort of, I think you meant we have your back, and I think that that's very valuable to residents on Bowen Island. And Kate, you also brought up, it was around the aquatic vegetation, like your relationship with Metro Vancouver and working with Metro Vancouver, and I was very happy to hear that, because we do have a lot of layering happening on Bowen Island, hence some of the confusion. So knowing that you're in contact with Metro and coordinating that and trying to use some of their resources to the benefit of us, I think is a great strategy, and I'm glad to see you doing that. Julia, just a question around, because one of the things that's come out quite a bit in the letters is, well, we do our own planning, why is the Island Trust involved? So that piece of the pie of local planning, well, what, 72% of your work? So just for pure clarification, we're paying our percentage on the remain, on outside of that, not that big part. So hypothetically, if you were doing our local planning, our bill would probably be like $1 million or something like that. Is that correct? Good.
That's correct.
Thank you. I just wanted that clarification. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. David?
Yeah.
Thanks. I've got a comment and I've got a question on the finance side, but I want some comments on Claire and Kate's presentation. So thank you again for the work on logging. Our council just passed our plan for the year, and one of the things is on logging. We want to take the annual allowable cut out of our crown land, so we'll move back to you on that. And I was involved, before I was a councillor, I was involved in the local group that was opposing logging. We mercilessly used your material in producing our material, so thank you for your work. And the new material that you have in the 10-year conservation plan, there's all kinds of great stuff in there, and so we'll be coming back to you on that, so thanks for that. On the fairness, I like the sound of fairness. It seems to me, the same issue that I raised earlier, it's a converted assessed value, the property values. If we're being assessed at 18.7% and we're around 10-11% of the population, it just seems unfair to start off with. So I know you can't change that, so how can you help on the fairness side? I mean, you said you're going to work on fairness.
Well, for the
what can
mayor,
be done?
Where we can work on fairness, the issue in front of everybody here is there's a multi-pronged approach to whatever it might be. Obviously, you're seeing costs. There's decisions around costs and investments in programming that you may want to vote against. That's one of the ways to limit that. We don't have the ability to change the act. There's a lot of pressure on Julia and her team during this process because they're identifying all of the administrative inputs. So every time they look at a pen, they're going, is this a Bowen pen? Or is this an everybody else pen? So we are always trying to do our best to fall frankly, on the side of not having, to have it not be a Bowen expense unless there's obvious evidence to the contrary. I think that's a secondary area. In terms of the allocated expenses, or, I mean, the apportionment, I don't think we have an ability to affect that.
Can I just follow up on that? Because one of the most important things that I heard in your presentation was where the formula resides. And you said that the act itself, the Islands Trust Act, was general in the statement, but didn't actually articulate the formula, and that the formula was articulated instead in the policy statement, which my understanding from other parts of the presentation, the policy statement is under review. Am I correct in that?
So it's a trust council held policy, 7.2.6, the municipal tax requisition calculation, that speaks to the formula of the calculation. It is separate from the policy statement.
So
It's in our protocol agreement.
It's in your protocol agreement.
It's
So,
in our collective protocol.
okay, so that goes to the question that David was raising, which is where do we have latitude to affect the percentage, given that we are not happy with that percentage, and we're trying to find where we can push. And it sounds as though there is a space where we could do so.
I can speak to that. So while the act doesn't specifically talk about administrative costs, I think there is sort of an understanding that any service or any product that's being rolled out, there are going to be administrative costs associated with that. And so the idea of administrative costs would sort of be a silent understanding within that. The 7.2, or Trust Council policy around the requisition speaks to how those administrative costs are allocated. Certainly it could be reviewed to look and see if maybe there's a different way of allocating the administration expenditures. But with the idea of fairness in mind, we do need to take into account all of the local trust areas. So for us, for example, to take something like our Victoria office lease costs. So we rent an office in Victoria. Those costs, we do split out into the various departments based on square footage for planning staff and for trust area services staff. So if we were to take the full cost of something like our Victoria office and not allocate any to trust area services or to the IT department, put it all into planning simply to reduce the Bowen Island levy, we would have backlash from the other local trust areas. So while there's space to review that, and I think it's a worthy review, it would still have to be a logical basis of allocation.
Absolutely. But it just would be really nice to go through that process and be able to justify it to our community. And that's said with support for the Islands Trust and our continuing membership in the Federation.
Yes, I think what this has clarified, I think, is the fact that it was that slide which says, no, it's not embedded directly within the legislation. It is actually contained within that Islands Trust Policy 7.2.6 and 7.26. And that, to my mind, moves the pendulum somewhat, and it certainly acts to clarify, because if you speak generally, people say, oh yes, the formula is, it's legislated. Well, not quite. And I think that opens a door to some very interesting discussions.
Peter, just thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to comment at the moment is, this is the first time I actually saw the full presentation from Julia, and certainly it's thought-provoking. And as Trustee Kale had said earlier, that he's hopeful that there's opportunity for conversation. I too, at this moment in time, I'm very hopeful by the questions that you're asking and what we're thinking, that this is really helpful for us all to come to understand what this means. And I'm really grateful for your interest and collaborative spirit in asking thought-provoking questions that enable us to at least understand what this all looks like.
Thank you.
So,
The question for Julia. I'm looking at the budget history page, which I know is not completely up to date, but back in, according to this, in 2017, 2018, the Bowen Island municipal property taxes were 3.2% of the total Islands Trust budget. Do you have a number that would be projected for the upcoming budget?
I think it was 4.2.
4.2, okay. So this is, Councillor, should I say, Trustee Kale has been talking about the overall total Islands Trust budget, but really, for Bowen Island's interests, we're talking about 4.2% of the total budget, right?
I just looked, it's 4.7.
4.7, okay.
4.7.
Thank you.
Which
Okay.
is.
It went up 0.5% in the last
We
30
just-
seconds.
I thank Councillor Buss
Hopefully we go to 8
for
o'clock.
raising that point, because that, if I look down the line,
And the second part of my question, or just that this is a comment, is last year, our family, my husband and I, in our little house, we paid $70, $70, you know, towards, in taxes towards the Islands Trust. So I just wanted to bring some perspective to the numbers that we're talking about, and for our family, that is well worth it for 3 large nature reserves on Bowen Island, a bunch of conservation covenants, and all the good work in advocacy and protecting the whole Salish Sea and the family of islands. So just a little perspective there, 70, under $100.
if I may, you're actually telling us that a percentage of budget next year, or this coming year, is going to be 4.7?
Yes. So,
I mean, we've seen 1.8, we've seen the figures in the 2s, we've seen the figures in the 3s. I think the higher, we've got 3.5 down on that list, and we now move to 4.7? Thank you.
I can also follow up the question then. I'm looking at the same piece of paper back in 1994-95. The provincial grant made up, this is money from the province, made up 16.2% of the budget. In 2017-2018, it made up 2.3% of the budget. And I just wanted to say that's why I think we could work together to encourage the province to chip in towards more for the Islands Trust.
All right, is that any more
Well, I
discussion?
just want to add, I think it's very important that the province chip in. Because if you read the act and you read, yeah, it's the act, 2 different sections of the act, the Islands Trust, quoting from the act, is holding all its assets, all the lands in trust for the local, for the provincial government.
That's true.
And all of that, if the trust disappeared, all that land would go to the provincial government. So
Definitely
we
stake it.
really, they need to pay for what they own.
Why has it dropped,
What role?
the provincial grant, so significantly? What, is
They
there
cut all the
any
grants
reason?
way back then,
Well-
and ours never came back.
Yeah, you know, I was just looking at the broader numbers there, and I want to thank Councillor Fast for that. But I can't help but remember when I first became a trustee back in 2008, 2009, the provincial grant was as low, a rock bottom low of $50,000. And it was through some lobbying, some outcry from other governments, and indeed, it's kind of come up to that, and it's a, what do they call that? It's a,
Small communities grant.
yeah, and it's applied across the province to all communities, and at some formula again, and indeed, it's come up, and, you know, quite honestly, you're right, we could get more money from the province to, I'm speaking candidly and as a person here, that the Islands Trust does this work on behalf of all British Columbians and on behalf of the province of British Columbia. That's a good question to ask, and certainly it's a question that's going to come forward.
Excellent, yeah.
But I'm not making any commitments or promises.
No.
I'm just speaking freely, so take that with a grain of salt.
So, yeah, there's obviously some more work done on that, to be done on that. there's no question to see if we can't just get this requisition down a bit, and we're gonna have to look at all the numbers, and, because it's gonna be ongoing, and we're gonna be, it's gonna be hard pressed to sell it to the public, you know, there's no question.
I'm just wondering, are we gonna have time to talk about the, our Bowen strategic plan?
We are right now.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
So we do have the 2019 island plan that has been approved by council at the last council meeting. I'm gonna ask Maureen if she wouldn't mind saying a little bit about that, because she was very instrumental in putting it all together for us.
But I just did have a question in terms of, that relates to the last issue. So the next steps are that the budget will be considered. What are the next steps? We've got members of the public who may not know what that is.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, so we are approaching our final budget. We've had 2 iterations of the budget go in front of Trust Council, and we've gone out to a budget consultation process across the Trust area. We've had more responses than we've had since I've been with the Trust, certainly. And they are on our website. So the Trust Council, well, it's posted, so it's on our website. And it's worth going to take a look at, just out of interest, some of the responses. And Julia will be presenting on March 12th at 3:30 the budget for discussion. We will review those items. There's business cases for all of the things that were outlined here as we thought were, you know, some of the issues that were affecting the Bowen calculation one way or another. Julia provided a subset on the screen here, but all of those things and the others have a separate business case associated with each of those. Those will be read into the meeting. There'll be discussion at that point, and there'll be the final vote is contemplated for the next day at around 4 o'clock. So that would be the 13th of March.
Thank you.
Can I just are the PowerPoint presentations going to be posted on the website?
Yep, through the agenda.
Thank you.
Because I wanted to look at Julie's.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, as of tomorrow.
Yep, thank you for that clarification.
So Maureen, if you want to say a quick word about our strategic plan, then we'll move on. We're sort of time pressed here.
So we adopted our strategic plan for 2019 at our last council meeting. It's linked in the agenda. We organized it around 3 themes: self-reliance, resilience, and responsibility. There are about 13 priorities included. It's ambitious. Some of the key bits are that we have a number of major capital projects coming up in the community. A community center, a fire hall, a water treatment plant, a multi-use pathway across the island. And I think that's probably driving some of the concerns about finances, and that we're anticipating those major capital projects coming on stream. And they're big for So I think I'll just leave it at that. It's linked, it's a good read. We're, I think, all proud of it, and we're all sort of gearing up for what we can do.
Conservation development came in there as a high priority also, which is great. So development going forward, we can definitely do that lens on it. We're going to have to pass some policies, but.
And I've been taking notes as far as our discussion here, and as we deal with things in our strategic plan, as Clare mentioned, if we want the Trust's help with something, like we did with logging last year, we as Bowen Municipal Council need to pass a resolution to ask the Trust for support. Sure. And then there comes a discussion looking at the, you know, what's available in our different agreements and things like that. Is that correct? Yeah. So I'd be happy to take ideas forward to the Islands Trust in my dual role, as I already have started doing. So.
Great.
But with the resolution of the rest of council.
I'm just wondering if it would be worthwhile adding to our next council agenda this discussion through the lens of our strategic plan to see where we can formally ask the Trust Council for support in advocacy.
Yeah.
I think it would be good before we forget.
Yeah, perfect. Duly noted. Thank you. There was a couple little articles in here for Island Trust strategic plan, and the house sound. Any discussion there? Do you think that's relevant?
You want to address that? You want me to speak to it?
Why don't you?
Okay, well, the Islands Trust strategic plan. We're not quite as fast as you folks with that preparatory work. We're beginning that process now. We have a strategic plan that is handed to us from the previous council, and that work continues naturally. And so we'll be seeking support for those major items that are on there, particularly the policy statement amendment, legislative amendment, those sorts of things. But we are engaging, we've kind of introduced the topic over the last 2 orientation sessions that we've had with our council. This coming council is the first opportunity where we're going to have a full morning to talk about strategic planning as a concept and a process, and sort of maybe floating a few ideas. And then through the summer and into when we actually come back to Bowen here in September, is that correct? So when we come back to Bowen in September, that will be much more flushed out as some ideas that I can't say for sure that we'll be wanting to adopt those, but it certainly will be close at that point. And so that's our strategic plan development process, is to put a lot of energy and thought into the strategic plan. And what I like to say from a personal perspective is being very strategic about what it is we can do, need to do, and prioritize those items. So that's, you compliment, add more information to that?
Yeah.
Just that it goes over the 4 years, whereas we do one every year.
Oh, I see,
right?
yeah, ours is a 4-year plan. Okay, didn't
Well, we
understand
sort of
that. So good.
update it, because we have labeled it a 4-year.
Yeah, well, we update it annually too, yeah.
Just very briefly, so this is an opportunity, a first discussion in the round of the elected officials coming up next week. But it probably won't be till September that there's fully formed ideas actually get voted on.
Sure.
And this is an opportunity for Bowen to come to the table with, you know, sort of what Ms. Lalonde's talking about. If you have some direction that you'd like to advance, you've got the horsepower to do it and to get it on the table for conversation at Trust Council.
You raise an interesting point. Next week, we'll be looking very, very closely and immediately at the budget
Yes.
and beginning the process on the strategic plan. I know it's a rollover 4-year plan.
Yeah.
Here, we look at our strategic plan because it drives the budget. So I'm not quite sure how the process, because I'm new to the trust, how we're actually going to do the budget and presumably working off a strategic plan which is at least 18 months old. Normally, a strategic plan drives the budget process, not the other way around.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, in a capital-rich environment, I would agree with that. So if I was in a municipality, I'd really want to have my hard servicing. You know, I just heard the list from the strategic plan of your top 5 priorities. I think all of those are hard services. Are they not? Yeah. We are less in that circumstance. We have very little long-term capital. We don't borrow. We have because we meet on 4 times a year, really what happens, the first year is planning, and by the time we hit the second budget of council, there'll be it's a 3-year strategic plan. We carry on with those items from the last council. We've got some nominal dollars in there right now, $25,000 from each side of the organization as holders, and those will get spent. But I would say it's the next year's budget would really carry the weight of a specific strategic goal. And quite often, like for instance, in the last 2 years, First Nations issues have been a dominant theme. Well, our answer to that is to get an expert on those matters working for the Islands Trust. So that has been the realization of our strategic goal. It's just got that different kind of rhythm to it.
Fair answer.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that's just what a wrap. We had something on house sound here. I don't know.
I think
maybe something rose to the table on a regional basis that you wanted us to know about.
All right, well, on that basis, I will adjourn this meeting. I gotta thank you all the trust participants here for coming over. It's been very insightful. Thank you. Very insightful. Thank you. Approval of the agenda. Everybody had a look at it? Is there any additions and any changes that people want to make? Or?
I'll move the agenda.
Good. David's moved it. Second from Maureen. And all in favor? Thank you. Public comments. Got anything for us?
No, I'll see you for next time.
All right. New business. Committee members' introductions. I think we've pretty much gone through that, eh?
I haven't met the gentleman at the end of the table.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Dennis Wilson.
Oh, geez.
Hi Dennis, my name's Raj.
Hi,
I'm the
Raj.
Chief Financial Officer for the
I'm
municipality.
sorry.
We just haven't connected.
Well, there you go, you see? What do I know?
Dennis was.
I just
the speech
figure everybody
voice.
knows Rush. Sorry about that, my omission.
No problem.
Goals and objectives of the committee. So in terms of reference, have we been through this? I guess not. Eh?
Yeah.
Now, these have been approved by council. Eh?
No,
Well, they haven't.
no, because they don't need to be.
Well, that's right. First you have to tell me.
It's the only place you have authority.
Wow.
Go wild.
Go crazy, eh? She wants to tell me that too.
All the time. I think one of the things we're looking for is input from our non-council members into the terms of reference. If there's anything there that you see that should be tweaked or that's out of line or you forgot to add.
And can you remind me what the changes are between this set of terms of reference and the prior one?
Yeah, the main difference is.
Yeah, there was just some.
Yeah, the development of a market valuation process is the main difference, which was not in the terms of reference for our last committee. And I think there were other tweaks to it.
Yeah, there were tweaks. There wasn't anything major for sure.
Yeah, one of the other things was regular reporting back to council. Because we found with the last committee was the rest, we had actually a couple council members who felt out of the loop. So just keeping council up to date of what's happening with this committee, both in open and closed.
So do we need to do the recommendation that we rescind?
No, that was done at the last council meeting. This is just,
Oh, that's
for-
right.
yeah,
That's
this is a
right. That's
report
right.
just for
That's
information.
Yeah.
I have one question about this. It says item G, identifying a target for funds to be raised from the sale of some of the land. Is that for this committee or is that a council target?
It's part of it, so if you read the top of 2.2, the committee will provide advice and recommendations to council. So the idea is that this committee will provide recommendations. And council's still grappling with the sale of some of our lands.
Yeah, it's a funny one, John. Like I don't know if we.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know if we'd ever be in that.
Do they want to sell 2, 4, 10, 20?
Yeah.
Sounds a little vague, and I thought council might have some.
Or maybe that was on our last.
It was on the last one, yeah.
Well,
It
and it
was,
sort
but
of
I
makes
don't-
sense, because, yeah, identifying which properties we would suggest being sold versus holding. Some
But
of the
this
previous
says-
reports
this says
did the
identify
same
a
thing.
target
They
for
made
funds.
recommendations.
But it's kind of odd.
You kind of need to go, in order to identify what you need to do, you need to have a sense of what you're trying to do. Exactly. And that's
Well, maybe
step
that,
one.
maybe the target will come out when we have our first, because we haven't met with council, right?
No.
Maybe that will happen when we meet with council.
Oh, in terms of how much.
Identifying
money-
a target.
Targets, yeah.
Well, I think as far as the last committee was concerned, the target ended up evolving into, let's see what's
Yeah, yeah.
going to happen here.
Oh.
Yeah.
And rather than saying we're aiming for $6 million. But, I mean, we're in a different circumstance right now in that we have a bit of a sense of what's going to happen in response to Area 1.
Yeah,
Lot 2, and we also have the added pressure of the major community projects where they do need some underwriting. So while I think we would have been really happy last term if we had managed to raise a couple $1 million, there may be more pressure on us as a committee to make recommendations for a higher target.
Yeah, the goal of the last time was simply what should we do to recover the surface lands debt? And we targeted a few things to accomplish that, but that was all that was sort of needed at the time. It's quite a bit different now.
I guess that was one of my thoughts in reading through the material, John, was that there's been so much work done here already over the years, going back to 2007 or 8, and there's a huge amount of information of value in what's been done historically. And in the terms of reference, I don't see any talk about what's been done in the past and whether it's relevant to what we're being asked to consider today. And again, that goes back to this idea about targeting a price. There was, in the early parts of that, there was a very clear target to pay down debt.
Yes.
That was a very strong objective that was clearly defined.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be a question I would raise, is do we want to think about that within the context of these terms? The materials that have gone past.
Yeah, I wonder how they fit into the present. That's the problem.
Yeah. Or do we just want to start fresh? I mean, that's really the question, I guess.
Well, I think we have to reflect. This is part of the funding part of it, which is one sort of part of it. I mean, obviously we need some land for housing. We need land for this. We need that for our medical center and all these things.
Okay.
But what do we need for funding? And I think that's a separate piece.
Yeah.
And I don't know in all the old material whether we're going to find anything in there that actually sort of talks to that.
Well, it does in a sense that when you look at it on a site-by-site basis, it does create some plans that give you some value derivatives. So, you know, I think that's where I see some real value in here, is that if there's agreement, that's the concept in terms of a form of development that would be acceptable on a particular piece, well then there's a value equation that you could draw from that.
Yes.
But having said that, it's also at the prerogative of council to decide on densities, for example, if you wanted to increase the returns. So there's variations on that thing too, but I just felt that there was a huge amount of value in some of the planning that had been done just site by site. So you can get some conceptual ideas about what was actually physically workable on the sites.
Yeah.
And then apply a value equation to those. That's a fairly straightforward exercise.
With that density on there.
Yes,
Yeah.
if you accept that that's a reasonable way to plan that density.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So build on the historical work.
Yeah, it just seems like it
Well,
just
that's a
seems a shame to throw
starting-
that out. I mean, it's a great starting point. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of good work.
Yeah, there definitely
There's a lot of input in there, yeah.
Yeah.
So just back to that G then, identifying a target. I mean, I agree with what Maureen said. There's lots of ways we could use money, but we kind of don't have any idea what the opportunities are. And it's sort of the two go together.
Yeah.
Like, give us $5 million, yeah, we can find ways to invest that in the community quite nicely. It's a different thing.
But you gotta balance, there's so many other things to consider.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like, oh, we could get 10, so let's take it. But that's the future use that you're stealing now. And do you need that money? So if you don't need it now, leave it alone until you do need that land for that money. So you really only want to target what your needs are now. Unless your intent is just to sell all the lands.
Well, but a more practical way, I think, to look at that, John, is that we all know, and you know this as well as anybody, the absorption rate on Bowen Island is a pretty finite factor to work with in terms of how all of this land will go out into the marketplace.
Yeah.
So I think those are predetermining factors in terms of what a level of return you can expect to get off of whatever the concept is that we land on.
The other issue is whether it's selling the lands or leasing the lands.
Right.
And that's a discussion that hasn't come to a landing at this point.
Yeah.
And I think obviously one of the first steps in this is an evaluation of the land.
Yeah.
There's absolutely, I would think that's one of the first things we have to do.
And just on that point, I mean, that's where I know I'm being asked to be on this committee for advisement in that area, because that is my area of expertise. But I think also, I think there has to be, the terms of reference around that have to be clear as well. So for example, one of the things I've obviously thought about is the location of the fire hall on 3. Well, what's the value component there of that particular piece? And I think in terms of the terms of reference, I think it's going to, we have to direct the appraiser to consider what it is we're looking for in terms of information on a site-by-site basis. So for example, on lot 3, are we just looking for the market value based on its current zoning or what the expected zoning is going to be in a development form? Or do we want more than that? Do we want to actually see some parcelization? And if the property were developed in this way, what would the values be coming out of that? I think those are things that we should discuss.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, I guess there's several ways to look at it. An Irwin Tory there, Don's buddy, do you know Irwin by any chance?
No.
Yeah. Anyway, his whole idea was we parcel everything in 1 or 2 acre parcels.
Right.
And then evaluate them all.
Yeah.
So that when the time came to either put a civic facility somewhere or do this or make some money or put some low-cost housing in or rental housing or an apartment block for workers, whatever it is, you could just go and you could say, well, this piece over here hasn't got a lot of sunlight and stuff like that, and we could pull that one out and just put an RFP in. I think we want to get to a position where we're not coming to council for decisions like this.
Right.
Because I think there has to be some guidance to council from people that know what's actually involved.
Okay, that's great. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for advice.
I think though we have to assume highest and best use on all these properties as we value them, as opposed to arbitrarily saying, so that the factors that vary are accessibility and developability and sunlight and a variety of things that may shape of parcels that would affect the value, as opposed to saying, okay, well here we'll do duplexes, and here we'll do apartments, and here we'll do something else. Well, I think what we need to do is get a base of land value based on accessibility and all these other factors before we start valuing for how much density and what kind of use. It's a little bit backwards from what
I don't think you can separate them though, Dennis. I really don't. You can do, unless the appraiser is clear on what the highest and best use considerations are, and generally it's zoning for sure.
Yeah.
You have to, if the zoning isn't in place, like if you're asking the appraiser to do a highest and best use analysis based on current zoning, that's going to be quite different than what we're talking about as a potential end use. So there will be some assumptions that we'll have to put in front of the appraiser to say, we'd like you to consider it under this particular zoning that would permit this, this set of circumstances about how that land can be used. Otherwise, we're not going to get the right numbers to work with here.
Well, exactly.
As a preliminary step, though, does it not make sense to just ask the appraiser to work with what is the current zoning for those lots?
That's something we definitely want.
Right.
But I think we want more than that as well.
I think we do want more than that, but just as a starting
Oh,
point.
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
zoning is changeable.
Yeah, right.
Of course.
I mean, that's the issue. We're playing with something that's could be anything.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's why I was trying to say that if we sort of looked at all the properties in terms of what their holding capacity, maybe it's multifamily, single family, maybe some different land uses which we can maximize on those parcels, then.
But where the appraiser will have trouble is looking at any of the parcels that have a civic zoning on them, for example.
Yeah.
Those are not something you can go to the marketplace to find examples for.
No.
So you can't, you've got to make assumptions about an alternate use in order to come up to a value. And that's really what I was getting at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely correct, but I also think that some of these things will be civic use and we won't get the highest and best out of them. We understand that. But I think we have to have just somewhere to start with that we can sort of hang our hat on and just, I don't think it's gonna be perfect, like you say, Tom, because the zoning is gonna be different on every piece of property.
Yeah.
But just something that we can work with,
Yeah.
even if they're just in relative values.
Well, I'll use another example. What's often done in the cases where you have a property that's got a civic zoning on it, and it's in amongst another type of zoning,
Yeah.
then, you know, the assumption that an appraiser would make would be that instead of the civil type of exclusive use, the assumption would be made that that particular piece would take on the zoning of the surrounding land and be used in a like-minded way.
Yes.
So you
Yeah.
know, it's not a big reach,
Yeah.
but it's something that makes sense in the face of something alternative to that
Yeah.
civic use. So I'll just use that as an example.
That's a really good example. And,
May I just say something?
yeah, sure.
And this is going to sound incredibly naive, but whenever I hear highest and best use, I get really twitchy. Because what we're talking about is not necessarily the highest and best economic use of that land. I think it's in the terms of reference, if it's not, no, it's in the island plan, that what matters is the highest and best community use of those lands because they are community lands. And part of what we are charged with as a committee is not looking solely at monetizing the community lands. It actually has to be looked at from the perspective of there are uses that these lands could be put to that aren't going to bring in money,
Agreed.
but they're going to bring in all sorts
Yeah,
of other
yeah.
benefits.
Value,
to the community.
or high
That's
value.
That's being,
Maureen, I
Yeah,
totally
developed
agree
on
with
high
that,
level,
but that
yeah.
won't have a bearing on the appraisal.
sorry?
That won't have a bearing on the appraisal. Highest and best use is a specific appraisal
Economic
term.
term.
Yep,
Yeah.
it has a very clear definition in terms of what it means.
Yeah, I looked it up, but I also thought that's the definition within an economic framework, and that is not the framework I bring to this discussion.
No,
No, not at all.
we're
Not at
not
all.
suggesting
So
that.
doing
We
a
have that
basic
flexibility.
appraisal to get a benchmark,
Yeah.
and
The
then use
benchmark is
that
what
to
we're
build
looking for.
upon, is that what you're saying?
Highest and best use is fundamental to any appraisal. It is the thing that guides the appraiser in the direction they go to determine value. So
Yeah.
it's an absolute fundamental to the process.
So that we work with that,
Yeah.
For our
recognizing the
discussion.
community uses that we're.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Is there the possibility that because we're talking about a holistic perspective on the community lands, or has anybody done the work? You were on, I think you were on the previous, I'm interested from an infrastructure perspective, the carrying capacity of the sewer and water systems to take, is there capacity, I guess it's one of the reasons I wrote that email, is there capacity within the system to take the zoning that's already in place, which has been worked on for several years? Do we know?
I talked to Bob about that the other day, and he doesn't seem to think there's any problem because I alluded to something else, and we were just throwing the numbers around, and he's taken everything into consideration.
That's in the current zoning?
Yes.
So I've asked him for something definitive in writing, and he's been away, so he
Yeah.
will provide that, we
Okay.
just didn't have it.
No, I'm
for
just
this week.
curious, because
Yeah.
if, say, for example, the current zoning put a strain on the water or the sewer, or,
Yeah.
I don't think it would be power, but if the water and sewer didn't have the capacity to take the current zoning, that might trigger, if we're talking about increasing the zone, the densities, well, okay, you can't do that without doing something.
Yes.
And that would impact any
Sewer and
appraisals
water,
as well.
right?
Well,
And I know we're upgrading the water, but
But that's a really valid point within the appraisal process, because The appraiser needs to understand that information too, Don.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that has a direct bearing on highest and best use.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, like on lot one, I mean, parts of lot one, you'd have to bring the water in from a fair distance. I wonder, I think it's at IPS. Just thinking of that little piece of property up at the top there. So the water's at IPS, so it can't be that far away.
yeah, I don't think all.
Septic would have to be done in fields.
Okay,
Well,
if you're doing septic, yeah.
you wouldn't be hooking it up to.
When would Bob back up? Do you think?
I talked to him late last week about it, whenever Dawn had set up its email, probably we'd have it out next week. He might already have something in writing, he's just been up north, so. We'll remind him.
So, is everybody okay with those terms of reference? They're relatively, they're not too tight. I think we can make them work for the time being. So timeline for reporting back to council. Anybody want to jump in on that one? Now, obviously, we have a 30-day, which is probably 2 weeks into the 30 days already. And, you know, this is to respond to the health clinic and Birch out there.
Well, it seems like we need to lay out a schedule, because I think we need to get the appraisals, and we need to, I think, meet with the different groups.
Yeah.
And sort of work with them on alternatives or whatever, get everybody happy as part of the process. And so there's a logical progression in all this, getting the work done, the analysis, then coming up with alternatives, and then meeting with the different groups.
Yep.
And that by itself will take a certain amount of time, which is probably more than the 30 days.
When are you going away, Lynn?
I'm going away the 9th. The 9th. I'm gone from the 9th to the 30th.
March 9th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't we get this terms of reference covered and move on, like, before we get into who's going where?
So are you thinking, John, that I was wondering, should we take the word target out? I mean, it's up to council.
I don't think we have to do anything with the terms of reference. I think they're fine.
Me too, right?
Yeah.
Do we need to pass a motion?
No, I think
No.
we're fine on their own either.
Okay.
I think what
If
we're
anybody-
talking about now is the 30 days reporting back to council.
Well, John seemed to have a concern about.
No,
I think he fell asleep
to
for a
yours.
minute.
No, I'm just, like, let's get through this part and get into the real discussion of everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm the guilty party for
Yes.
the 30 days.
Yep.
And the initial recommendation was for 90 days. And I looked at that and I thought, if we have a recommendation that says report back in 90 days, we'll be reporting back in 180 days or 360 days.
Okay.
So I pushed it and it was passed.
You had your reasons, yeah, I know we had to.
I had my
I
reasons.
understand, yeah.
Dawn and I talked about it. What's interesting about the resolution is if you take a look at it, it doesn't actually say what we're reporting back on. At
True.
the end of a 30-day period, we could be reporting back on the progress on getting an appraisal.
That's because the whereases weren't included. The
That's
whereases.
exactly
yeah.
why,
Yeah.
yeah, which is why I removed them. So the purpose of this was to light a fire under this committee. We would have been meeting in April if that resolution wasn't there. We wouldn't be sitting here at 8:20 in the evening
Yeah.
after 4 hours of Islands Trust meetings.
You know what, you're absolutely right.
No, that's for sure.
So, I agree, but I would like to see something that we can take to those guys in 30 days, and I don't know what it's gonna be, but just, we want to bring them in at a certain point in time, and it's gonna be a negotiation, but we have to be up to speed to know what we're offering and, you know, where we're coming from, so we can listen to them and see if we can work something out in there.
I'm prepared to speak to some aspects of what you just said in the closed meeting though,
Yes. Yeah.
and report.
Yeah.
I did have a fire lit under me, so
Yeah,
I'd
good.
like to report on that.
Very good. I don't know if we're gonna get much from this. Timeline for reporting back, so how do you want to deal with that? I mean, that was the resolution that came up, and I think, we'll do the best we can.
Well, we would do report.
And we know that
We
we-
will report our status in 30 days,
Yeah. Yeah.
and where we're going from
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
what we've done and where we're headed.
Well, I would be up for reporting in a week or two, like, I'm comfortable with that.
Well, you might be.
Well,
I don't have a
one of
problem
the
with it,
things-
but it should be something meaningful.
well, yeah, that's why I brought my sunglasses.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
Allison had a concern about, wanting, all of council to be involved. I'd like to respect that request, and maybe we can meet with council, I don't know, bi-weekly or every third week, or, council typically meets twice a month, right?
Second and fourth Mondays.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I
maybe
would
every
say
se-
once a month would be plenty enough.
Yeah,
That would be about 100 times more than the last one.
well, and, yeah, I just think that'll help the end result, if there's a consensus in the room that we're, they're feeling that they're part of it, which we want them to be, I think, everybody here.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
And also-
even if we just report on, like, I've got a lot to report, but it's in the closed agenda, so
Yeah,
at least I feel it is, I don't know.
yeah,
I've written a couple
I'll
of
let you know
emails.
if it's not.
Yeah, thanks.
yeah.
There's definitely
No,
no
there's-
value in dropping a bomb and saying
Yeah.
it is.
We've done that before and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what if we aimed to report on March the 25th? It's not quite 30 days, but we can report on our first 30
Yeah,
days.
we were talking about availability, so,
Yeah.
yeah, so I can do that, but then I'm gone for a week myself, and you're still away. Tom, you might be back.
Just back.
So
Oh,
Tom
really?
and,
You'll be back?
yeah,
I'm back, I'll be back on the 20th.
yeah,
Oh,
so,
okay.
so that's it, that's a completely, this is old school, but
Yeah, yeah.
I put all these green blobs where we did have opportunities to meet, but he's away for the month, he's going to Maui tomorrow for 2 weeks, so, yeah, the 25th, I think we would have something to report, for sure.
Yeah.
The committee can continue to correspond by email, and we also
Well, Dennis
have-
and I will be here, right?
Yeah.
Right?
But as well, we can have electronic
I can-
participation at meetings.
Yeah, I can Skype or whatever.
Well, you're on holiday, so, right?
I don't know, yeah. Depending on whether you want to.
You could scoot over to Kauai and Skype with,
That would be cruel.
Maybe you guys could,
That would be cruel.
yeah. Yeah, so that, I think that gives us a, and it's certainly within the 30 days, I think, Maureen, right?
Yeah,
No? It's outside the 30 days even?
yeah,
Just slightly.
it's close.
Okay, close.
Close enough.
Okay,
We can only do what we can do.
yeah,
We'll
so,
try as hard as we can, and that's, it's just
Oh,
the
okay.
reality of things. But let's try.
So when's the
let's
one
go for
before the
25th then.
is there one on the 11th?
There,
Council?
there
I don't
is,
think that- I think the
but
25th
we're
is fine.
currently preparing the agenda for that. That'll go out.
Oh, yeah, you need a,
Yeah.
yeah, so put us down for the 25th.
Yeah.
Okay,
What day of the week is that?
Monday.
always.
And what time of the?
We have evening
Oh,
meetings.
yeah, evening, yeah.
Yeah, likely if the committee will want to meet with council, we'll probably do it prior to the regular meeting, so prior to 6:15, maybe a 5 o'clock start.
You okay?
Yeah, no,
We
I'm
can
fine, evenings are
touch
fine,
base.
it's just like, I'm in the office 4 days a week.
Yeah, but
Yes.
could you make 5? Like if it's at 5?
So we do have our solicitor coming over for a special meeting with council at probably 4 PM on the 25th. But we can talk to Hope and we can figure out a time that works for everybody.
It's just that we were all clear on Fridays, but I think that's the day you're not here.
Yeah, but I mean,
So Tom would be in town.
yeah.
Well, the trouble is, for me to get across, that means I have to catch like a 3:30 ferry in order to get over here. And, that really cuts into my day,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so.
Could we meet at 5:30? Like, we won't be saying a lot, I don't think.
Yeah,
This is with council?
yeah, it's just that we do have our lawyer coming over for that particular meeting.
At 4.
So,
Oh,
yeah, so he's going to probably be with council for about an hour and a half or so.
so it's
So
fine.
normally it would be okay to do it just before, but we could maybe schedule it for after our regular council meeting, make sure it doesn't end too late. But why don't we can talk about that offline,
Yeah,
work at a
sure.
time that works
Yeah.
well for everybody.
Okay, okay. But tentatively, the evening of the
25th,
25th,
yeah.
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 Okay.
Okay, request for information from the planning staff. Dawn, that was yours.
Yeah, again, Daniel hasn't had a chance to pull anything together.
Yeah.
He, the binders that were provided do provide that information. I can get him to work on it. That'll probably be with what's on his workload another week before he can pull it all together.
I was just looking for a one-pager.
No, I know.
Not a
I
lot.
know. They're pulled in a bunch of different directions.
Does the binder reflect the recent changes to lot 1? It wouldn't?
No, this was 2016, this binder was
Right.
prepared.
So
That's why I was thinking, to get
Yeah.
an updated
Yeah.
one-pager that's got all that data.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Daniel can do it, because we actually divided that lot 1 into certain sections, and they're zoned and
Mm-hmm.
the whole works, and we can take a look at those and see
Yeah.
if they're realistic.
Right, yeah.
Steph, if you just don't mind adding a note to the minutes, that I'll follow up with staff to get the necessary one-page report.
Excuse me. And then the request for information from Public Works, and that's from Bob. And that'll have to wait till he gets back, I guess.
He's back, or he should be back tomorrow.
Anything anybody else wants to talk about before we move to this close?
Actually, there is.
Okay.
It's just under the information items. I asked that the communicating with the public policy
Oh, yeah.
be included in this agenda package, in part because this whole area is sensitive. And the communicating with the public policy makes it clear that the mayor is the spokesperson
Yeah.
for council. And I think by extension would be the spokesperson for this committee.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess this is just a caution that reporting out comes from you, Gary.
Yeah, okay. I guess the other thing is part of the public participation as part of that bylaw or the policy, I mean, is we have to go to public hearing. Is that the idea? Or not? Is there nothing in there?
It's,
Oh, okay.
no, it's got nothing to do with the public hearing.
Okay, well, sorry. Super.
If I may just build on that, the other item that you had asked provided is the difference between the open and closed meetings. What we have found with the previous version of this committee, and I would also point to the TAB committee that we had a few years ago, is the importance of holding as much as we can in open meetings. Otherwise, there's a feeling of, not only from council, but from community members, the lack of inclusion. So just to be cognizant of that, and the more we can hold in open meetings, I think the more support we have from council and community. But having said that, what's on the closed agenda needs to be on the closed agenda.
Okay.
So on this appraisal, just before we leave the open meeting here, on this appraisal, do we want to be asking council for money for an appraisal? Are we at that point, or?
Well, I think it's probably something we should talk about in the closed meeting.
Well, when we
yeah.
start talking numbers, I just wondered
Yeah.
if it was.
Yeah, we do need council approval to assign any budget.
Yeah.
So if we move ahead with an appraiser, we will, our policy is, I think we need 3 bids. Council can waive that if they like, if they find somebody that will provide the service and fairly quickly. But again, that's, we have to make a recommendation to council.
Yes.
In order to access any funding.
But it's the same old thing. I mean, we probably won't do it on the 11th, so now we're into the 25th to get that.
We can bring forward a recommendation to council for the 11th, but we deal with it tonight.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
good.
for sure.
All right. So the next one is move to the closed meeting. So we'll close this one out and move to the pink sheet. See you later, Don. Thanks.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Don.